I went to the studio and I said, let's not just do another movie. Let's swing for the fences.
I think what people are in store for is Avatar, but timed 100.
Yeah, that in a nutshell is the whole damn problem. Comparisons between George Orwell and Aldous Huxley are like the prologue or the training mission for any video essayist. They're quite a good prologue or training mission, because they deal with the conceptual society, each taking aspects of the real world and extrapolating to some undesired end, thereby providing us with a warning. I don't intend to subject you to my own entry in this genre. I got that out of the way when I started university. Though it's necessary to touch on it just a little bit as it sets up the argument that follows forthwith. My short-form conclusion is, Orwell's 1984 is useful in the Far East, where it seems to have been used as an instruction manual in the formation and business of states. For we in this corner of the world, though, he shows us what we already know to hate and despise. He provides a reminder to be vigilant, but it's not necessarily the most useful one. Huxley, by contrast, he identifies the threat as belonging with the things we actually like. He gives us a more insidious form of totalitarianism, precisely because the origin of that totalitarianism is found in things we today consider to be the height of liberty: drug use, free love, freedom from religion and family, sensory joy over moral duty and obligation. Where Orwell taught us to fear control and oppression and brutality, Huxley enjoined us to fear our own bland and lazy hedonism. Or, to put it more simply, he taught us to fear our own desires. There's nothing necessarily prophetic about being a reactionary and a crank, but the modern world does seem to insist on proving them right. The cult of safetyism, used to justify cancelling unpopular speakers, the invocation of words like unsafe, dangerous, harmful in the context of art and opinions, are Huxleyite more than they are Orwellian. When you live in a world that panics more about the hurt feelings of trans people than the government confining you to your homes in the name of public health, you live in Huxley's world. Huxley's world because the real question of lockdown was never, does this control the spread of a virus, but rather, what, if anything, gives them the right to do it? And this question was never asked by the bulk of the population, because the bulk of the population, like the subjects of Brave New World, wanted only to feel good. Like goth kids who assert their countercultural individuality by all dressing in the same way, hedonistic freedom, the right to feel good, protection against feeling bad, masquerades as individualism but lends itself toward the collectivism of the herd. And the herd, as Huxley was fond of pointing out, is easy to poison. Now you might be wondering, what the fuck has all of this got to do with Avatar? Well, here's the thing. Brave New World has its equivalent of the cinema. Huxley called it the Feelies, a dystopic extrapolation from the talkies that emerged in and around the 1920s. Films with sound, with talking, with singing. They sent Huxley into paroxysms of curmudgeonly rage, ranting against the debasement of the human psyche and the human intellect unavoidably inflicted on the audience by modern entertainment. Indecency, decadence, decay, and the spiritual void. The demand that you see solely in order that you be considered up to date with the modern fad. The talkies offered, to use a sentence of his, nothing but disembodied entertainers gesticulating flatly on the screen and making gramophone-like noises as they did so. And perhaps you see where I'm going with this. So, in Brave New World, we get the Feelies. The Feelies convey no meaning. They contain no real message. They aren't designed to challenge you or to make you think. They aren't really a narrative art form at all. They are all designed to delight the base senses: touch, sight, sound, and smell. They tell no stories because Brave New World doesn't allow stories to be told. It's all about keeping people comfortable. John the Savage's argument with the world controller, Mustafa Mund, is over his right to feel sorrow, loss, heartbreak, and tragedy. I want God, he says. I want poetry. I want real danger. I want freedom. I want goodness. I want sin. In fact, Mustafa Mund says, you're claiming the right to be unhappy. All right then, says the Savage defiantly. I'm claiming the right to be unhappy. I think that's enough cock-teasing, so I'll get straight to the point. The first Avatar is one of my least favourite films ever, and I watch a lot of shit media. I've got a strong stomach for it. Yet the first Avatar is one of the few films I struggle to digest. I hate it with something approaching a passion. It makes me physically angry to sit through it. I feel like Huxley in the cinema watching the talkies, watching those disembodied entertainers gesticulating flatly on the screen and making gramophone-like noises as they do so. The first Avatar marked one giant leap toward the Huxleyite future, the Brave New World. Avatar wasn't cinema, Avatar was the Feelies. How so? Well, what does everyone remember about Avatar, to the extent they remember Avatar at all? The visuals, the sensory pleasure, the colours, the computer-generated facade. Good films that tell good stories are remembered for many more reasons than how they looked. They add something to the culture. They provide common reference points, ideals, aspirations, paragons of courage and villainy, the meaning of which we all understand simply by invoking them as references. They add beats to the human story. But Avatar added nothing. It wasn't at all interested in adding anything of the sort. Nobody remembers Jake fucking Sully, or whatever his blue bint's name is. If I were to be uncharacteristically polite about it, I'd compare the film to a concept car at an auto show. It looks lovely, it sounds fantastic, but that is the extent of it. There's nothing inside of it. There was never meant to be. It was never supposed to be made. It's an advert for technological skills that will be applied elsewhere later. Avatar probably did add something to the craft of cinematography. It set a new industry standard for special effects, but it was clearly never meant to do anything other than that. Its astounding and undeniable success is indicative of a trend in society, a trend away from story and toward content, a trend away from questions and answers and toward filler. We live in a world that is profoundly uncomfortable being challenged, and so Avatar presents us with no challenge. We're an audience that resents having to pay attention, and so Avatar does not require us to. We demand comfort, safety, reassurance, and superficial splendor, bread and circuses, and that's what Avatar gives us. We are, in essence, uncomfortable with emotion, which is why Avatar doesn't contain any. Mustafa Mond in Brave New World, like both Aristotle and Plato before him, recognized art's profound ability to incite and to evoke. Mond, in exiling art, sided with Plato in his condemnation of artistic catharsis, the bloodletting of emotions. You cannot negate negative emotion while maintaining positive emotion. You must have one to have the other, or you must have neither, and Avatar provides us with neither. And its success suggests that we as an audience are not so much happy about that, because how could we be, as we are content about it. In short, Avatar has made a virtue of nothingness, and it's been championed for it because, well, look how pretty it is. People with stories to tell don't treat stories as an afterthought. If, on the other hand, you only need a story as an excuse to show off your technological brilliance, you are highly likely to lapse into simple derivation, and that is exactly what James Cameron did with the first film. It was, beat for beat, Dances with Wolves, perhaps with a little bit of Pocahontas thrown into the mix. An entirely soulless retelling, packed with stock characters and cliches, with a gloss of modern and equivalently soulless messaging on the environment, on capitalism, the Orientalist elevation of the noble savage over the lazy caricature of our own industrial age. Even the soundscape was derivative. Our first glance at the creatures of Pandora presents us with the T-Rex roar from Jurassic Park, and several Velociraptor sound effects lifted from same. The soundtrack was also a derivative, James Horner presenting us with a note-for-note transposition of his recurring motif from Troy and Willow. The dialogue was, of course, derivative, making for derivative characters. Cliché evil army man who looks like a live-action version of the villain from Small Soldiers. Cliché corporate goon, cliché good guy scientists. Cliché beautiful and spiritually pure native savages. And, well, Jake Sully doesn't even have enough of a personality to be considered a cliché. It was, without doubt, the laziest, most expensive, big-budget cheap production in modern cinematic history. To call it half-assed would be an insult to anyone who had accidentally sat on a landmine. And yet, it remains the highest-grossing film of all time. People flocked to see it. People came out of it very impressed, but almost entirely unmoved, which is precisely the point of the Feelies-style entertainment. You aren't supposed to feel anything about it on an emotional level. You are just supposed to have your senses stimulated by the pretty lights and the luscious visual feast of Pandora. Masquerade anti-capitalism is the safest, most unthinking excuse for a message you can possibly insert in a film. It's fashionable. All your influential idiot friends already believe in it. It's neatly condensed into Twitter hashtags. It's the trick affluent people use to excuse their own affluence, to pretend at being radical even as they espouse the same talking points and buzzword not thoughts as you would hear in any high-status art gallery, concert hall, or fancy New York dinner party. It is, in short, a substitute for thought, which is why it never seems odd to the radical chic set that they should be nodding along sagely to the messaging of the biggest Hollywood studios. And it is on such substitutes for thought that Brave New World was constructed and maintained. When radicalism becomes fashion, it ceases to be radical. True radicalism is the enemy of the harmonious society. Fashion, by contrast, is the midwife and nursemaid of a safe and ordered unreality. It is, in short, conservatism in an anarchist t-shirt. Everyone went to see the first Avatar because everyone went to see it, calling back to Huxley's complaint about the obsession with seeming up to date. And then people moved on and forgot everything save the fact that they had seen it once, long ago, and they kind of remembered it looked a bit pretty. This is a death knell for narrative storytelling in cinema. Before Phase 4, before the Star Wars sequels, before the DCEU, before all those franchises that are now a byword for empty artistic decadence, for fashion as morality, we had Avatar. It is the epitome of a pretty, abysmal film. Very pretty, and entirely abysmal. And now we have another one. And once again, we're being told that this is the cinematic event, not only of the year, mind you, no, the cinematic event of a generation, a choice of words that reveals the conceit if you bother to look for it. To say something is a cinematic event is another way of saying current thing, that which you must watch to be up to date. To brand it such an event is self-fulfilling. Every other major studio has willingly stood aside and well out of the way, because there's an event happening, don't you know? And there can only really be one event at a time. No regard for the innate merits of whatever stories they themselves might have to tell, of timeliness, of theme and intent, of import. No, there's an Avatar film out, and there's no point getting in the way. Look at all the people flocking to the cinema to see the Avatar film, because there's nothing else on at the same time. This proves that we were right not to put something else on at the same time, don't you see? Avatar has to make $1 billion to break even? Well, I guess we'd better give people no choice but to go see it. That's what competition means, right guys? The winner is predetermined, everyone else applauds it from the sidelines. Now you might take it from all I've just said, that I'm not going into Avatar: The Way of Water with an especially, clear mind? If I hate the first film so much, you might wonder, can I really be objective about the second? Am I not predestined to hate it, whatever its qualities? And look, yeah, maybe you're right, but I hope that you're not, because everything I've said so far contains between the lines the ingredients of a good film. Avatar's problem was that it had no story, that it was a shallow imitation of superior works, cut and pasted in as an excuse for the visual effects department to sell their wares. Well then, the alternative is quite obviously to tell a story with meaning and with purpose, add depth to the world you're depicting and the characters who inhabit it. Prove that you have some reason to tell this story in particular, that you have something to convey. And if Avatar: The Way of Water does that, which is to say, if it does everything the original film didn't, then yeah, it'll be a good film, and not just the latest installment in our long decline toward entertainment as the Feelies. Which begs now the obvious question. Has Avatar: The Way of Water done that? Has it succeeded in any way? No. No, it hasn't. Now, it's been so long since the first film came out that it might be prudent to begin with a summary of its plot, since this is technically a sequel. Avatar, the first, follows a man who leaves the safe confines of civilization to explore an untamed wilderness. Much like Dances with Wolves. He has a crippling injury, specifically to his legs, the use of which he has lost, and he can't afford the medical bills to get them fixed. A military bigwig offers him a way out. Much like Dances with Wolves. Off he goes into said untamed wilderness, where he encounters a group of indigenous people who are oh so in touch with nature, but whose existence and that of their verdant home is threatened by the very forces our hero is supposedly signed up with. Much like Dances with Wolves. Having spent some time frolicking with the natives and learning their ways, our hero is accepted as one of their tribe. Much like Dances with Wolves. One of them, a pretty lady, serves as his translator in his interactions with the tribe, and he falls in love with her, but their relationship is initially forbidden until he proves himself and gains acceptance. Much like Dances with Wolves. Throughout the journey, he compiles a journal that is used to fill in the narrative, much like Dances with Wolves. Shortly after he gains acceptance into the tribe, disaster strikes, and the evil colonists he so recently left turn up and invade, causing much death and destruction, much like Dances with Wolves. Faced with a choice between his old allegiances and his newfound love, our hero chooses love, and he leads the brave band of natives against the evil colonialist aggressors. Just like Dances with Wolves. They win, and the evil colonizers are driven back, though we know they'll come back again eventually. Just like Dances with Wolves. And that's the plot of the first film. I appreciate I've skimmed over a few details. If you want a more thorough explication of the first film's plot, go watch Dances with Wolves, because it is exactly the same, save for the fact that that one is infinitely better. Incidentally, I've pointed this out before. Anyone who pays attention to films has pointed this out before. It doesn't take a tremendous amount of insight because it is so fucking obvious. And in response, some defenders of the first Avatar have suggested that, well, all modern stories borrow bits and pieces from older media. Just look at George Lucas, who combined Frank Herbert's Dune with Kurosawa's Samurai, the Battle of Britain type wartime epics of the 40s, the Golden Age westerns of the 50s and the 60s. If you criticize Avatar for being derivative, the argument goes, you have to criticize Star Wars for the same thing. This is what, in the trade, we call a moronic argument. But it's not so moronic that it warrants no response, in that I've heard enough people repeat it that it must require some kind of response because evidently it's not sinking in. It contains, I suppose, a grain of truth in that much great art does indeed derive its beats, its themes, from older and archetypical works. But it misses the profound difference between invention, innovation, and derivation. George Lucas derives his ideas from multiple sources, but in combining them in new and exciting ways to tell a grand epic, he has innovated within the medium of film. All innovation derives from the invention of those who came before. Invention is, in fact, often quite useless in its own terms. It takes innovation for the wacky inventions of old to find a popular form and use. If, by contrast, you simply take the entire plot of an older work and slap a new coat of paint on it, your work is not innovative, it is purely derivative. Visual effects, of course, are a different matter. There, much innovation did occur with the film. But it's probably also worth setting out at this stage the difference between the necessary and sufficient conditions for a good film. A necessary condition is that which must exist for an argument to hold. The argument here being Avatar or The Way of Water is a good film. But the necessary condition cannot hold the argument alone. A sufficient condition is that which must exist and which, if it does exist, is enough to hold the argument on its own. Good visuals are a necessary but not a sufficient condition for a good film. A very pretty film that has no regard for character, plot, dialogue, message, or purpose is in fact a pretty shit film, both pretty and shit. Kinda like Avatar. So it's not enough to say of The Way of Water that it looks incredible. You've met a necessary condition, you have not met a sufficient one. Likewise, themes. I'm sure we'll come back to this during the plot breakdown that follows, but a good theme is likewise a necessary but not a sufficient condition. And it barely qualifies as a necessary one, given good theme is so fundamentally subjective. I've already heard people try and argue that The Way of Water champions themes of family, fatherhood, and solidarity, and that these are, quote-unquote, good themes, which makes it a better film than a modern offering that champions so-called bad themes. But this is not an argument for anything save your own semi-political bias toward the film. But Muh Themes was advanced in defense of The Last Jedi. It was a shit argument then, it is a shit argument now. So if The Way of Water looks stunning and contains good themes, whatever the hell that means, that is still not enough for it to be a good film. That, by the way, is not the only Last Jedi comparison that can be made. I've been struck by the reaction to a video on my second channel how so many of the same old arguments have been trotted out. It has good themes, it's visually striking, the director has a vision. See also any defense you're likely to hear of the abysmal Snyderverse. One of these, the visually striking defense, is pure superficiality. The Holdo maneuver in The Last Jedi did indeed look beautiful, but it was also staggeringly dumb and effectively broke the mechanics of space battles in a franchise that relies, in large part, on the mechanics for its space battles. It was pretty and abysmal on a writing level. The other two, the arguments from Themes and Vision, are at best a defense of the intent behind the film. They are not defenses of the film itself. They aren't even especially good arguments for the intent behind the film, given how selective their purveyors are about the evidence that they cite and the evidence that they ignore, but we'll come back to that a bit later. Since we're doing a brief roundup of arguments so dumb they're only deployed by people who'd have trouble calculating their own IQ, even though it consists at most of two small numbers, that the film has performed well at the box office, that it has made a lot of money, is not an argument for the film's quality. It is, at best, an argument for its popularity. Though even then, the fact the box office only accounts for those who paid to see it, and not for what they thought of it, makes it a sketchy argument even for that proposition. Most of the idiots who deploy this non-argument would not accept that argument were it to be deployed in favour of a money-making property they dislike. Twilight and 50 Shades of Grey made a lot of money. Most of Phase 4 and Disney Star Wars made a lot of money. Coldplay, BTS and Harry Styles make lots of money.
Say we take off, nuke the site from orbit. It's the only way to be sure.
McDonald's sells more cheeseburgers than any given restaurant sells good quality steaks, from which you would have to be mad to conclude that McDonald's does meat better than a proper steakhouse. Popularity and quality are not the same thing. This video will get many more views than any given idiot in my comment section saying, "But it's made squilly and so you're wrong, lol." But I'm morally certain that these idiots would not recant solely because of my comparative popularity. Oh, and I guess there should be one final brief mention of the other argument I heard frequently on my second channel, all those people flooding into the comment section to tell me that it was a good film because they left their brains at the door and thereby enjoyed it. You didn't need to tell me, folks, that you were all a bunch of brainless morons, but I guess stunning and brave. Well done. Representing I can't use the R word, can I? Well done. In short, none of these things, vision, beauty, themes, profit, is an argument for the quality of the film we're discussing. They'd be terrible arguments even if their purveyors applied them consistently, which they don't, because the closer you get to a genuine Avatar defense, the easier it becomes to have the purveyor of that defense sectioned under the Mental Health Act on the grounds of acute mental incompetence. The true sufficient condition we're looking for is that the film is well written. That is not to say that badly written films cannot be entertaining or pretty or humorous or enjoyable. This is shit but enjoyable explains the long career of Arnold Schwarzenegger. But for it to be good and enjoyable, it requires a story that is well told, characters that are well formed, a world that is well built, relationships that are well realized, emotions that are well understood and properly invoked, and all of that stems from the writing. So, with that in mind, let's break down the plot. I'm going to apologize in advance. The footage for this is not going to be quite so thorough as perhaps some of my more recent videos have been. That's because it's Christmas, and I really don't want to have to spend all Christmas and my New Year meticulously looking for Jake Sully's single facial expression in 3 hours of film. Sorry guys, not gonna happen. I should say that the movie Cynic has already done the introduction I was planning on doing.
Avatar 2 is upon us, and James Cameron is back to raise the bar yet again.
The bar has been lowered to depths we can't even fathom. If anyone can go down there and raise it back, it's me.
His name is James Cameron, the bravest pioneer.
Link in the description, folks. Now, on with the plot. We kick off with a long series of visuals, the camera floating over a luscious forest, and Sam Worthington sucking all the charisma from an otherwise vibrant world by giving us a quick voiceover reminding us all how beautiful and dangerous the beautiful, dangerous forest is. He reintroduces us to the Smurf people and what passes for their culture. Something about prayer beads memorializing their lives. He and his woman from the first film, you'll have to excuse me while I Google her name, Neytiri? Smurfette. He and Smurfette had a baby son. Then they adopted a daughter born from the avatar of Sigourney Weaver, who is still unconscious in a pod. Sam Worthington, hereafter Sully Smurf, informs us that her conception was a total mystery. The prayer beads, he explains, mark all of these moments in their lives, serving as a very convenient narrative trick, because it allows for an awful lot of exposition. A bead for the son, so Solly Smurf can tell us about the son. A bead for the daughter, so he can tell us about the daughter and her unexplained birth. A bead for their first communion with a tree, which allows him to remind us that the Smurfs really fucking love their trees. It's a little bit contrived, but it's not an entirely discreditable device. It is, though, a narrative crutch. If you look up anything about Avatar or The Way of Water online, you're likely to read some variant of, the first film was much loved and the sequels were highly anticipated. Everyone really wants to return to Pandora. But the beads kind of give the lie to that, because the basics of Pandora simply are not established in the minds of the audience, hence this need for a reminder. Yes, an awful lot of time has passed since the first film, 13 years in fact, but love of places and of people, isn't something we usually need to be reminded of. 2 decades passed between Return of the Jedi and The Phantom Menace, yet The Phantom Menace didn't require Liam Neeson to give us a monologue reintroducing us to Tatooine, because Tatooine is Tatooine, and you remember it even if, like me, you weren't alive when Return of the Jedi came out. It's culturally iconic, much like Pandora isn't. In part it's because Pandora, for all it was luscious and colourful, was a substantially empty place. We have to be told that the forest is dangerous because the first film didn't fix that with any special firmness in our minds, toying with it a bit as it introduced us to a few creature features, but otherwise placing the threat on something beyond the forest, evil whitey colonizers. We have to be reintroduced to the lore of the Smurfs in this opening passage because the film carries in so little by way of cultural content. The Smurfs have the bog-standard, sub-Pocahontas nobility of the savage in the first film, but precious little life. The problem with the noble savage motif is that it's really so hard to distinguish from base Orientalism. Think the depiction of Easterners, Muslims, Buddhists as enlightened spiritual gurus who meditate and talk bollocks about natural forces and folk healing. It's an incredibly lazy trope because it's actually a form of self-obsession. Its deployment is designed to hammer home a fashionable pseudo-critique of our own society, not to actually portray the savages as deep or true or individual. The noble savage is distinct from us, but not distinct from anyone else. You could substitute the Smurfs for any other example of the trope, and all you need to do is tweak the aesthetic in order to slot them into an entirely different film that has an equivalent reliance on that trope. That's the state of things going into The Way of Water, part of the job of which must be to actually give the Smurfs distinct qualities, a society, a culture, a history that is all their own. Prayer beads and tree communions aren't an especially promising start to this endeavour. It's a bit like going to a house party and reacquainting yourself with that boring guy you met at the last one and then forgot all about as soon as you left, whose name is probably Keith. It doesn't improve when Solly Smurf goes on to tell us, sagely, that happiness is sacred. One of those lines that is supposed to sound profound, but that in fact has all the depth of meaning of something you smash out of a fortune cookie. Smurfette keeps popping them out, so there are now 4 children to keep track of. I'm sensing a little bit of caste bloat already. We're then told what happened after the final battle in the previous film. They sent the Sky People back to Earth, but a few stayed behind on Pandora, mostly scientists, and I quote, loyal to the Na'vi. Okay, I guess. The last film left us with the strong impression that the only people loyal to the Na'vi were one specific and very small team of science people, Ellen Ripley's set. But I suppose we can allow that there were many more such people around at the time, and they just kind of forgot to make their loyalty known at the time. There's also a young kid called Spider, a human baby, who couldn't leave because he was too young for a cryo casket, so he's also a thing in this story. I could ask why and how. Why does freezing people into hibernation only work above a certain age? But this film is more than 3 hours long, and if we start interrogating that kind of thing now, the video will run into 2023. Magical science bullshit is very convenient because, unless you establish rules for it, it acts as a soft magic system. You can pretty much contrive your way into any setup you like. You can't deep freeze a baby? Well, fine, I guess. Just add another character to the list. Despite being a human, he spent all his time with the Smurfs growing up. Solly Smurf describes him as a stray cat, someone who will always be an alien, one of them. Unlike Solly Smurf himself, who's been a Smurf since... what the fuck, Solly? He's only marginally more one of them than you are, you plank. This insult describes his character's intellect and his acting range too. But anyway, I get that Solly Smurf has gone full native. But the film's opening only crosses the first few years since the events of the previous film. It's not been an especially long time. He himself has only been a Smurf for a very small fraction of his life. He should be the one most likely to embrace Spider, no? And then the film does something that's actually incredibly helpful. As Sully Smurf explains, it took him a few years to learn the Smurf language. Until this point, they've been speaking with subtitles, which poses a problem for me because I am watching the film in a country where all the subtitles are in Spanish, I think, which I just hopped over to just for this evening to watch the film. That's definitely what I've done. Then he says that after a few years, the language became as intelligible to him as the English language, at which point the Smurfs themselves start speaking in English and the subtitles go away, meaning I can actually follow their dialogue now. Thank fuck for that, I suppose. I'm going to come back to regret that, aren't I? On we go, watching as he teaches one of his kids how to shoot a bow, watching as he and Smurfette go flying on their pterodactyl things amid the nonsensically floating islands of Pandora. He tells us happiness is simple. And then, because we've had 6.5 minutes to reacquaint ourselves with this world and its peoples, Jimmy Cameron decides it's time for the plot to start. So, Sully Smurf ominously tells us that happiness can vanish in an instant. This particular instance heralded by the appearance of a new star in the sky, which he says can only mean one thing. It could mean a few things, actually, but never mind. The evil colonizers are back. Dances with Wolves 2. Dance Harder, now showing at a cinema near you. The colonizers are not only back, they're back in force, and they land in a visually stunning sequence. The jets from their ships causing a big forest fire, just so we know that evil has well and truly returned. They emerge from the ships in those mech suits that were absolutely stolen from the Matrix Revolutions, and Smurfette sees the fire and has a cry. Then we jump forward in time, and some distance away, to where the evil army man from the first film is, back. He was definitely dead, but never mind, I guess. They saved him by turning him into a Navi with a buzz cut, just so we know that he is still evil army man. In the first film, he looked, acted, and sounded indistinguishable from Chip Hazard in Small Soldiers.
Every living thing that crawls, flies, or squats in the mud wants to kill you and eat your eyes for jujubes.
So ask not what your country can do for you, only regret that you have but one life to live.
So I think that will be his name throughout this video. Lest you think his return both inexplicable and nonsensical, never fear. Because it turns out he left himself a video message for precisely this eventuality, explaining that it was always the plan to bring him back for the sequel, even though he was very much dead when we last saw him. He was shot through the heart twice by Smurfette. So I assume the film has a very good reason for not giving us a new villain whose mere existence would be much more plausible. We will keep an eye on that one as we go. But for now, I'm afraid we have to get distracted by, how do you even describe what follows? Well, I suppose describing it would be a start. The film is struggling with this particular bit of exposition because it clearly didn't write the first film with Chip Hazard's return in mind. So besides having the video log detail all the most plot necessary details, this is what happened, this is what we've done, this is why we've done it, and this is what you'll do next. It attempts to keep Chip Hazard's first film character consistent by having him deny the entire basis for making the video log in the first place. The film unironically has him speak the line, "What you won't remember is my death," because it hasn't happened yet and it ain't gonna. And someone in the background says, "Hoorah," in case you'd forgotten the last film's Army Man Bad motif. This is cringe making. Rephrased, he has essentially said, "I'm not going to die, but here's what you need to do once I'm dead to keep the next film going." To be clear, it is perfectly believable that he does not think he'll die. Remember, his characterization in the previous film was in large part smug superiority, supreme confidence in his abilities, supreme disregard for what he thought was a bunch of primitives who he never believed could stand against the might of his troops and their technology. What is supremely unbelievable is that he should have maintained this belief while also taking a spare 5 minutes to enact a secret Emperor Palpatine-style death and rebirth contingency plan, replete with information such as, "You're probably going to want some payback for the death I'm sure won't happen, and Jake Sully's the guy you're going to want to kill for killing me, even though I don't know at the time I'm speaking that Jake Sully is going to have anything to do with the death that I don't think is coming." I just, how was this greenlit? How was this your preferred setup for your sequel? This dialogue makes Duke Nukem sound like Shakespeare. It's absurd. It's like the cutscene from an entirely forgettable action game from the late 90s. You had so many options for a new villain, with new motives, a new character, countless possibilities, almost every single one of which making so much more sense than this. But this is the thing you go with? Was James Cameron really killed long ago? Is the person now in his place actually an avatar with roughly the same looks and personality but none of the talent? I've been writing since I was about 6 years old. Tiny me writing 700-page Pokemon novels. Yes, it's a thing. No, you will never get to see it. I would have been ashamed to have come up with this. It is, I mean, just play that back over. Play that back over. Your villain in this film is the Smurf clone of the evil army man in the first film, who made a Smurf clone for himself and left a voice message for himself in the future telling him to go and take revenge on a man who hadn't killed him yet and that he didn't know would kill him because he didn't believe he was going to die. And then he closes with the line, "Marines can't be defeated. You may kill us, but we'll just regroup in hell. Semper Fi."
We have lost the battle. We will not lose the war.
Just fuck off, Chip. Then we're back with a Navi war party attacking a monorail train on bird and horseback. And you might be thinking, well, maybe Jimmy Cameron's become a complete hack with dialogue and character, but hey, at least we know what he's good at. Action. Except that, no, not really, because we see Solly Smurf diving at a helicopter, shooting a rifle from the back of his pterodactyl. And apparently these helicopters are so pathetically armoured that a single burst of small arms fire just goes straight through them. Are they made of paper, James? Why would the super high-tech colonizers, who can build ships that travel through space, use military aircraft that can't withstand a quick burst of machine gun fire? Hell, there are some types of wood that can provide minimal protection against gunfire. I guarantee you that a civilization capable of interplanetary flight has materials harder than wood. Why the fuck aren't they using them? Why are these people to be feared if their military vehicles can be taken out so easily? And then fucking Smurfette takes another one out with a bow and arrow. The train was transporting weapons, which the Smurfs land and steal. I think the ones we're going to spend a lot of time with here are the kids we were introduced to earlier, but it is very hard to tell because the Smurfs all really look alike. Another useless helicopter turns up to interrupt them, but once again, it is taken out without much fuss, though not before it fires some missiles that hit very near the presumed children, one of whom gets a bit injured. Up in space, Smurf Chip Hazard gives his reanimated Smurf Marines, because there's lots of them now, their mission: kill Jake Sully. While back on Pandora, the war party returns and we have some family strife between Sully and his kids, who disobeyed his orders in going down to the crashed train. Smurfette tells Sully he's too hard on them, and he says it's his job to be hard on them because he is a father. Well, fuck me. Look at the lovely theme. I now adore this film. All that nonsense we just sat through, nah, the theme, it's family, it's fatherhood, that's lovely, that's really nice. That makes the film good, I'm told, reliably, by really unreliable people. Now look, joking aside, I understand why some people are keen to champion this. A media landscape defined by themes and ideas that are put charitably progressive has left large parts of the audience frustrated. Once common values and stresses, family, fatherhood, masculine traits and virtues, and whatever else, have been very consciously deprioritized and quite often stigmatized. In their place, we get the balkanizing fads of quote-unquote progressivism, an emphasis on group identity against the whole, the elevation of supposedly marginalized peoples against the lazily presumed oppression of modern society, the demonization of anything to the right of Gramsci as conservative and reactionary and even fascist. Everything from kids' cartoons to rom-coms, elevating this or that tiny part of the population as recompense for some perceived historic injustice. Now, I should say, I am part of one such tiny population, and though I think some aspects of the right-wing response to modern media are overblown to the point of hysterics, I do broadly agree with their complaints. But here's the thing. I've already said that I do not consider good themes a sufficient condition for a good movie. This film has already undercut those so-called good themes with its recapitulation of other and at least equivalently damaging and less desirable ones. The first film was an unthinking, hyper-fashionable lampoon of everything from the military ethos to capitalism, an unveiled rebuke of allegedly exploitative and corrupting and environment-busting Western life. All of that has already re-emerged in this film, and that drum will only be beaten harder and louder as we progress through it. But even ignoring all of that, we have the self-same problem as gay people and women have in modern media: shit writing. Has anything done more damage to gay and female representation in film than the abysmal quality of the movies they're represented by? Do you think that representing women in the ludicrous characters of Rey Palpatine and Captain Marvel has made people fonder of women generally? Is portraying all gay people as hypercamp Pride Parade prancing bundles of sticks actually helping gays, bis, and lesbians by normalizing us in the eyes of society? Do you not think that going out of your way to unnaturally big up the gay in children's cartoons might make the groomer accusations seem more plausible? It's like those wacko Christian films that occasionally come out and simply reconfirm the prejudices of the sane audience. A theme attached to an abysmal product will fall with that product. It will not elevate the product. If you decide to make a trans-inclusive musical about the childhood days of Adolf Hitler, you are still depicting the childhood days of Adolf Hitler. It doesn't magically become a story of empowerment. And if you tell people that they have to like the adaptation because of its inclusive and empowering themes, you are tying those themes to Adolf fucking Hitler. So no, this film gets no marks for remembering that families are a thing that humans sometimes form. The film will get marks for its own qualities. Thus far, though, it has no marks and is doing that theme an injustice. It's attached the theme of family to something that has been, so far, pretty bad. But we've got a very long way to go, so maybe it'll improve? Stop laughing, it might. We get our first sight of Ellen Ripley's avatar, who is still unconscious. We then meet grown-up Spider, who's hanging around the lab, dressed in a loincloth. He throws himself into the theme by pointing out that it's not always so great to know who your father was, and Smurfette's daughter reassures Spider that he's not him. Him, it turns out, is Chip Hazard. So I am morally certain this film is going to play on the tried and tested sins of the father motif. My prediction at this stage, Spider will have dark thoughts and do dark deeds. There'll be some "we're not so different, you and I" moment involving Chip, who he'll meet. I really hate to suggest that they'll try and shoehorn in some weird father-son mechanic between Spider and Smurf Chip, but then at the end, Spider will realize that love and friendship overcome all challenges, and yeah, he'll go good again in the end. Well, we'll see. Speaking of Chip, he and his Smurf Marines arrive on Pandora and meet a strong woman in an exosuit. She gives him a tour of the new base, of which she is the commander. She is the World Commander woman, and she explains that the Earth is dying, and so their mission is to make Pandora a new home for humanity, but that they must pacify the hostiles before they can do that. Say, remember the first film? No, of course you fucking don't. Well, I do, because I voluntarily subjected myself to the torture of watching it last week. In that film, the reason that evil colonists wanted to mine Pandora harder than Ron Jeremy but with far less warmth was bullshitanium. Unobtainium. That was it. This impossibly valuable metal was the reason they were there. Because environmentalism hadn't quite become a full-fledged death cult way back in 2009, Greta Thunberg was just a baby autist as opposed to an exploitable autist back in the before times. The theme and messaging of the first film was the milquetoast evil capitalist exploitation motif. But now, in 2022, environmentalism is a fully fledged death cult, and the Swedish Doom Goblin is akin to one of those child prophets beloved by wacky Christian apocalypticists. So the stakes have been upped. Unobtainium? Well, I don't think that's even going to get a mention in this film. Forget it. Not important anymore. The real reason we're here is that the Earth is dying, which, given Avatar takes place in the 22nd century, still serves as a rebuke to all those hyper-fashionable idiots who told us that we only had 12 years to save the planet about 4 years ago. Here though is a problem with themes as defense. Avatar, as a franchise, really isn't any better than any other film we complain about today. Sure, it says nice things about the family values in this film, but it otherwise serves as a mirror to James Cameron's moral imaginings. And James Cameron's moral imaginings are indistinguishable from your generic Boko Haram, child-minded soldier. It infects this film to such a degree that the sequel is prepared to entirely ditch the premise of its progenitor. Unobtainium? Fuck it. The stakes are higher now, because that's what my New York dinner party friends demand. So now the whole Earth is dying. Which it wasn't just a few years ago, but that's just how this works. You'd think, by the way, that this might invite some pretty important moral questions later in the film, don't you? I mean, if the colonizers are here and they're doing bad things, but ultimately they have to be here and they have to do bad things because, well, otherwise the entire human race will die, that seems quite important. I wonder if the film will discuss this at any point across the next 3 hours. Chip and the Smurf Marines go out into the forest, while Smurfette's daughter frolics around in the grass with some pretty sky jellyfish, to be woken up by Spider. The rest of the kids turn up, and they make to go home, but they come across the Smurf Marines' tracks in the soil, and they follow them. The Smurf Marines themselves come across the site of the first film's final battle, including Chip Hazard's old mech and what is left of his corpse. The Scooby Gang spies on them, and rather than making any observations about the quite dire threat a roaming bunch of hostile avatars represents, they just argue about whether they'll be grounded for investigating further. One of the gang radios Sully Smurf, who is flying with Smurfette, and he tells them to run away from the Smurf Marines. But they inevitably get captured by the Smurf Marines. We learn that Daughter is a half-breed, because she only has 4 fingers, and Chip Hazard learns that one of the gang is Sully's kid because he has an attitude, he flips him off. And then he learns that Spider is his kid. So he calls base and he tells them that he's bringing high-value prisoners back. I think it has to go down as pretty damn lucky that he and his Smurf Marines on their first visit to a vast jungle on this alien world just happened to be wandering through this precise part of it at this precise time to run into just the right collection of Smurf children to move the plot along, as indeed it must be considered quite lucky from the Smurf Marines' perspective that the Smurf children just happened to find their trail and decided to do the absolutely most stupid thing they could possibly do in following them. This last has a tenuous but present grounding in character traits because the kids have already been shown to be inquisitive to the point of recklessness. I suppose any grounding is better than no grounding at all, so yeah, this kind of works. It does constitute some kind of progress. Chip Hazard then finds a video log showing his own death at the hands of, well, he thought it was Sully Smurf. That's the memory programmed into him by real Chip Hazard, back before real Chip Hazard knew he'd be killed by anyone. This log shows him that, in fact, his death came at the hands of Smurfette. Now you might think this would have a significant impact on Chip. His entire motive thus far has been revenge against the individual who killed him. He's monomaniacally focused on taking vengeance against Sully. Now he knows that it was in fact Smurfette who killed him. Will the target of his ire change? Will he now be possessed by a bitter hatred of Smurfette instead, with a consequent diminishment of his ill feeling towards Sully Smurf? Well, the answer should be yes. The villain in his story is now Smurfette, after all. He should absolutely hate her to the exclusion of all others. If he comes across Sully and Smurfette in the same place at the same time, he should, probably, pass over Sully in order to get at her. The answer is in fact, no, for reasons. This discovery doesn't actually change anything about him at all. It doesn't impact any subsequent actions, because Jimmy Cameron wants the film to focus on a fight of the fathers, so to hell with inconsequential things like, consequences. This, by the way, would be spectacularly easy to fix. Let's show him finding the log, but instead of it playing out his death in its entirety, it could show Sully Smurf hitting him, and the hit broke the camera, leaving aside that there was, of course, no camera to break in the first film. This would allow him to persist in his mission, seemingly with his suspicions having been confirmed, but in fact with the same partial account that set him on this mission to begin with, playing then on the tragedy that results from certainty absent knowledge. And he picks up his own skull and dog tags, then he crushes the skull as Spider watches. The way he holds it up and looks at it, I genuinely thought he was about to say, alas, poor Chip Hazard. I knew him. Spider himself is, by the way, just Mowgli, really. I think that's pretty clearly the model. And the film seems to be asking what might have occurred had Mowgli's father turned up and been a complete bellend. That at least is innovation of a kind. Though if ever Chip Hazard tells Spider that he should have realized the jungle was a part of him all along, the film will actually be doing the second Jungle Book. You know, that kind of awareness would be significantly out of character for a guy who is otherwise an entirely one-dimensional bogeyman, though, so I doubt we're going to get that moment. Sully and Smurfette catch up to the Smurf Marines before their air support arrives, and Sully takes one of them out with a tomahawk. The Smurf Marine obligingly doesn't make a sound to alert anyone, even though Sully took no measures at all to prevent that from happening, and then they give up on stealth anyway when Smurfette shoots another Marine through the head with her bow, triggering a hectic escape sequence for the kids, while Chip Hazard tries to bait Sully into fighting him. Significant plot armor is then deployed in the sequence that follows, as the Marines fire what must be thousands of rounds at Sully, his older son, and Smurfette. At one point, Sully and son are running away in direct line of fire, yet the bullets all the many hundreds, if not thousands of them, obligingly fly above and to the side, but never quite at them. I assume spending some time dead has made these highly trained Marines a little bit rusty with their aim. So they try some grenade launches instead, and one of them knocks Spider off a log and down a small hole, whereupon he is again inevitably, captured by Chip Hazard, doubtless setting up some kind of argument in the near future about whether the Smurfs should risk their lives to save a human, because, stories are good when you can predict exactly what will happen several scenes in advance. That's sarcastic foreshadowing, by the way. Obviously, that's not an especially good sign in a story. Do you know what's worse though? It's laying out something like that, which is the bare minimum expectation for character writing, and the film surprising you by not doing it, which is what in fact will occur, but we'll come to that presently. Back at the war camp, Sully asks Smurfette to take the kids and leave, which pisses her off because she wants to stay and help protect her people. They are especially in danger, Sully explains, because for some reason Spider knows every detail of their operation, meaning he could lead Chip Hazard right to them. And in case you missed that the film has taken family as one of its themes, it decides to go full Fast and Furious in this argument. Smurfette rages that she wants to protect her family. Sully says Chip Hazard is hunting his family. He wants her to take the family away so the family can be safe. He has no plan, but, and I quote,
"But I can protect this family wherever we go. This family is our fortress."
Family.
For family.
For family.
Family. That's family.
Family's family.
It's family. I don't have friends. I got family. Got family.
Back at the evil colonizer base, Spider is being mind probed, which apparently consists of him being strapped to a chair and forced to watch some strobe lights, while being gently questioned by World Commander Woman. They're scanning his brain as they do all this, but the scene is pretty lifeless. World Commander Woman isn't especially imposing, and Spider isn't selling the torture scene at all. She asks him something banal, he shouts some variant of "I don't know," or "let me out of here," this last being placeholder dialogue that should really have been replaced by something a bit less dumb in the final script. I guess they just forgot to remove all the placeholder dialogue, which is why everything everyone says sounds so banal. Spider gets a nosebleed, which is the only way we know he's been under any kind of stress at all, because honestly he's not acting this particularly well. You'd think the guy who gave us the visceral horror of Aliens, who's put together some pretty brutal scenes across a host of his movies, might have been able to summon something a bit more than this for a torture scene, but I suppose James Cameron was interested in something else at the time. And the film really needed to do more than this, because it has decided to pinch the Vader watching Luke get zapped bit from Return of the Jedi. Chip Hazard is watching his son get tortured, or, not his son, the son of the man from whom he was cloned, and he's supposed to feel a bit uncomfortable about it. We know this because his eye twitches, and that is called acting. And then he intervenes to stop the so-called punishment, suggesting a more personal angle. But if the film is going to pursue the familial line in this way, if it is going to try the Vader and Luke moment, then it needs to give us a very obvious indicator, A, that Spider is really suffering, and B, that Chip Hazard actually gives a damn. And it doesn't do either of these things. Again, Spider is just strapped to a chair while some lights circle his head, and the bland woman asks him bland questions. The scene isn't purely derivative, it's an attempt to take inspiration and apply it to a new setting, new characters, a new scenario with new conditions and connotations, but in this case it's failed in the delivery of its innovation. Besides which, it's narratively difficult to convey anyway because of the setup. Chip and Spider have shared a couple of scenes together, probably not amounting to more than 3 minutes, the bulk of which was in the capture scene from earlier. They've had no meaningful interaction. We know Chip knows Spider is the son of the man from whom he was cloned. Are we going to acknowledge that he is his son? Is that even the situation here? Well, I haven't decided that one yet. But anyway, that's the only revelation, the only dynamic element in their relationship thus far. Luke and Vader had 3 films. Vader's doubts and his lingering goodness were trailed well in advance of his salvation. That was the end point of their relationship. While here, we are at the beginning of one. We're forced to remember, because it's unnatural to remember, that this Chip Hazard has all the memories of old Chip Hazard, though it's barely been relevant at all, but that Chip Hazard didn't have a son at the time of the first film. It was completely absent when what passed for his character was built. But now it's deployed, as though contiguously, despite the fact that there's been a huge break in the narrative, both internally to the film and externally in the time between the films. Chip Hazard has no backstory with Spider. Neither of them have much backstory to speak of. Yet here we're supposed to believe that a hitherto shallow cliche of a cold-hearted oorah marine has developed instant parental instincts for a kid who couldn't have been more than a couple of years old when the man he was cloned from died. And yeah, when you put it like that, that's an incredibly convoluted setup. World Commander Woman pointedly reminds Chip that Spider isn't his son, thereby reminding us of the essential confusion of the setup. You can untangle the confusion, and the film is going to have to try and do that, but it's given itself an exceptionally difficult job. Chip and Spider have a chat in the cell block, and Chip gives Spider OG Chip's dog tags, whereupon the film starts trying to tackle that difficult job with as much competence as you'd expect. Blue Chip says that he's not OG Chip, he just has his memories. Because he has his memories, he knows that OG Chip wasn't a very good father. He's not apologizing for it because he isn't him, but he says that he, Blue Chip, can help Spider get out of the cell anyway if he plays along. So here's the thing. No, Blue Chip is functionally OG Chip. He doesn't just have OG Chip's memories, he has his personality, his drive, his motivations. Why else would he wake up with a pre-established want to take revenge against Sully? Yet if he is functionally OG Chip in terms of memory and personality, and he's telling the truth about OG Chip being a bad father, for the few minutes he'd have actually had to be a father at all, then why was he especially uncomfortable during the earlier torture scene? If OG Chip cared about Spider, that might be explicable, but he doesn't, or didn't. It's not been established, because none of this was trailed in the first film. It would have been tremendously out of character for OG Chip to do what he just did. But then he has to be OG Chip in order for his baseline motivation to make any damn sense at all, otherwise he'd not have been here to begin with. I'm really not sure the writers were prepared for what they've set up. They thought that they were opening just one small can of worms, and if you moved on quickly enough, people would not notice and just forget about it. But no, the worms are fucking everywhere. It will actually take days to clean up this mess. Is it the plausible? Well, I don't know if it's plausible. An alternative is that this really is just Chip's ruse to get information. And I emphasize just a ruse to get information. Yet, no, even that doesn't work. Because there's every indication that the torture device he interrupted would have got that information anyway, making kindness and compassion an entirely unnecessary conceit that, if anything, just made things more complicated for them. Back with the Na'vi, Sully Smurf passes the torch to some nameless generic Smurf to lead the insurgency in his place, saying the leader must die so the leader can be born, which doesn't work because he's not dead, he's just leaving. Anyway, he and his family leave, and he claims this means the people, the jungle Smurfs generally, will be safe. That also doesn't work, because though Chip Hazard is hunting him specifically, the rest of the evil colonizers are not. They are here to colonize the whole planet. Remember? Remember, film? Remember how you told us that that's what they were here for about 20 minutes ago, because the Earth is dying? You seem to have sort of forgotten that very important piece of information. The colonizers generally are at war with the Smurfs generally. Sully and the fam going somewhere else distracts Chip specifically. The rest of them are still fucked. And Spider still knows where the rest of them are, meaning if he does lead Chip to them, he will have led Chip to where he thinks Sully and the fam are, but instead have just led Chip to the Smurfs that Sully is leaving to protect, which is another plot thread we've apparently just sort of forgotten about. You know that prediction I made earlier? The argument about whether they should try to rescue Spider when Spider isn't even really one of them? Yeah, I might have been overestimating these writers, because we haven't had that at all. They don't seem to care about him in the slightest. Daughter Smurf had a bit of a cry, but that's it. They've just lost their cousin. They refer to him repeatedly as their cousin. They've just lost a kid who grew up with them. They've just lost the only person in camp who has an experience similar to Sully Smurfs in the sense that he's an outcast human. But they don't give a shit. If the film doesn't care about the fate of its characters, if nobody they know really cares about their fate, well, why should we care about them in the audience? Sully and the fam fly for many hundreds of thousands of miles without sleep to the Minecraft water biome of this film. The Sea Clans, who live among many hundreds of islands, where Sully and the fam will be able to disappear without a trace. Because I suppose the hyper-advanced colonizers, who arrived in spaceships from one assumes many light years away, and who currently have many ships in orbit, have absolutely no way of scanning the planet's surface from space and identifying major Smurf population centers? Oh, except they absolutely can do that. Remember, it's just that they've forgotten about it. The fam is received by the Sea Smurfs, and younger son ogles a sexy Sea Smurf as she emerges from the water. Now, I'll grant you this might just be me being very obtuse, or it might be the dodgy quality of the Indian cinema that I'm definitely sitting in as I write all of this, but I really struggle to tell most of the Smurfs apart, hence not trying to give names to many of the fam, besides the very important ones, Sully and Smurfette principally. The two sons in particular are very alike, and they are very like all the other generic Smurfs too. This is perhaps due to the video quality, it may in fact be me, or it may be a problem with having your entire cast made by computers. I made a similar point about Cuck-Hulk in She-Hulk. There's a blandness to their features and expressions that make them seem a little bit less distinct. The people you know in real life are instantly varied and recognizable in large part for the huge conglomeration of tiny details that you barely notice in the moment, but that form a large part of someone's physical identity. Tiny imperfections in the skin, the shape of eyebrows, hairline, teeth, facial balance, the size of nose, of ears, how they smile, how often they blink, how often they make eye contact while they're speaking, lips, eyelashes, the shape of the inner ear, all things you would never think to remark upon unless any of them are exceptionally fuck ugly, but all things that comprise an individual. Because they are so many and because they are so tiny and because nobody actually spends any time thinking about them, they reflect in the biases of computer animators. CGI characters will have a smaller number of more obvious differentiating characteristics, but these don't achieve the same uniqueness as the myriad little things that nobody has the time or the attention to include. And in a film composed almost entirely of CGI people, this does become a bit of an issue. The Smurfs are proportioned to be beautiful, long, lithe, toned, full heads of hair, large and beguiling eyes, but all in roughly the same ways. The Sea Smurfs are a case in point. They have bigger hands. That differentiates them from the Jungle Smurfs, and the film takes care to point this out by having someone ask how Sully and the Sully fam can possibly hope to swim when they have such tiny hands. And besides slightly thicker and stronger tails, that is really their only differentiating feature.
We are reef people. You are forest people.
That's different.
Add to that this film's fairly flippant approach to character writing, and you get a whole bunch of vaguely pretty creatures, but few if any individuals, which in turn makes it hard to really give a shit about anyone the film hasn't told you repeatedly is a main character. In any case, here, we meet Big Chief Sea Smurf, as Sully continues on his Dances with Wolves-style narration, conveniently telling us all the character stuff that we would never actually pick up from the performances, such as who Big Chief Sea Smurf actually is, what his personality is, and how strong he is.
The warrior was the chief of the Metcaina, the reef people. I knew him as a tough leader, but it wasn't Tone Warrior I was worried about.
And because the Smurfs are noble savages, we get the usual noble savage motifs. Really a play on the plot of the first film, making this segment derivative of something that was itself derivative. In the first film, Sully Smurf struggles to find acceptance because he isn't really a Smurf. He proves his worth, then he's accepted. In their meeting now with the Sea Smurfs, Big Chief Sea Smurf's wacky wife says they can't be accepted because they're not real Smurfs. They have demon blood, etc. Sully Smurf casually mentions that yes, he was in fact born of the Sky People, but he and the fam can adapt. Honestly, guys, just give us a chance to prove it. Posing at least one fairly chunky world-building question. How on earth would the Sea Smurfs have any idea what he's on about? They have no idea who he is. They say as much. So can they really conceptualize the origin he's relating to them? The implication is they've had few, if any, dealings with the Sky People. That's the reason Sully and the fam came here, after all, so they could hide. So what the hell did the Sea Smurfs understand when he says he was born of the Sky People? Have they even encountered any avatars? The setup would suggest the answer is no. But that means his explanation would be at best entirely meaningless to them, and more likely would actually feed into their suspicions. Big Chief Sea Smurf's wacky wife has said she thinks they are demons and not real Smurfs. Her words had some noticeable effect on the crowd around her. And now you've confirmed that you are not real Smurfs, that you are in fact born of the Sky People, compounding the fear of the unknown with the fear of the known. The film repeating the "we'll earn acceptance" beat from the original almost certainly means that they will go on to earn that acceptance, but should they even be given the chance to? Is that not a little bit too convenient? Wacky wife insults Sully, so Smurfette hisses at her, but Big Chief Sea Smurf intervenes to calm the women down. He answers one of those questions raised above, would the Sea Smurfs have any idea what Sully was talking about, by saying that, hey, Sully's people might be at war with the Sky People, but the Sea Smurfs aren't, and they can't let them bring their war here. Suggesting they've had no meaningful contact with the Sky People, so they couldn't possibly understand anything they've just been told, and should, indeed, probably drive out Sully and fam for being some kind of demon spawn, quite besides the risk of them bringing war to this peaceful community. What the film wants to do, of course, is to show that we are stronger together. Here we have one tribe of Indians who've been fighting the European colonizers, fleeing to another tribe far away and struggling to persuade them that the colonizers are any kind of threat to them. I wouldn't mind this kind of thing. Tropes from the narrative of history are the basis of all the great stories, if the film weren't so blatantly ripping off any number of superior antecedents. Again, there's a difference between innovating on established themes to create something new and just pinching a narrative wholesale and painting it blue. Innovation is essential if you're to really create anything at all, rather than simply repackage, not least because it's hard to be especially interested in a story you've already seen play out 100 times or more. We already know exactly where the Way of Water is going with the tribal strife, because we've seen it already. There is no mystery of creation, no unexpected turn in the story, which is one of the many reasons, less than a third of the way through the film, that I already find myself pretty fucking bored. Big Chief Sea Smurf lets Sully and the fam stay, provided they learn how to be useful, and then we're introduced to his children, as if we weren't already struggling to tell the spawn apart, and they're all going to teach Sully's kids how to be Sea Smurfs. Indistinguishable blue people in a blue environment. Yay. I can see why everyone loves the visuals so much. The Sea Smurfs, by the way, are almost impossibly romanticized. We get a quick stroll through the village and it's like a Disney World tour. Happy animals, happy people, all wondrous and shallow. There's absolutely no sense of reality here. The world doesn't feel in any way inhabited. All its people are there when the show demands it be so, they just pop out of existence when the show closes. One of the harder parts of world building is to actually give your world to life off the page or off the screen. To show without telling that there's a history here, that its characters have lives when we're not watching them. It's often achieved in the smaller details, wear and tear, snapshots of background characters actually doing things they would be doing in their daily lives, things that have an identifiable use. The ideal is to have your principal cast, new to the area, looking out at the world around them, not the world looking in at them. Think Luke's first visit to Mos Eisley, the way everyone around him has something to do, is going somewhere, doing something that doesn't concern him at all. They barely even notice him. The Way of Water, of course, does the opposite. But why, for example, would a random Sea Smurf just be sitting on a fish snake thing by the side of the road they happen to walk down, there just waiting for our main cast to walk by in order that we get one of them interacting with the fish snake wondrously? What is this person doing there? Why are they there? Why aren't they going anywhere? They can't just spend their life sitting beside the road on a fish snake waiting for a protagonist to walk past. There is a word in the English language, one of those weird, slightly archaic but quite lovely words that rarely gets an outing these days. That word is Wonderlust, spelt with an A. Someone possessed of Wonderlust has an impulse to, or a longing for, travel, but I'd like to swap a letter here for the purposes of this review. Avatar: The Way of Water has Wonderlust, wander with an O, a longing for or impulse to wander. Wonder at its magnificence, wonder at the visuals, wonder at the facade of the world that it's created. Everything about it has to seem wonderful. But this kind of wonder is entirely surface level. It's a wonder for the eyes first and the ears a distant second. This is the prototype of the Feelies mentioned way back at the top. It's why everything in the world is looking in on our characters, because this isn't really a world at all. It's an exhibition. Everything is arranged to delight the viewing audience. There's no life off screen. Nothing happens unless the camera is on it. Everyone and everything acts on cue, stands in the appointed spot, acts the scripted part. It's not a story, it's a theme park attraction. And yes, it is very pretty, but I've made a point of avoiding much talk of the film's aesthetics because that's precisely what we're supposed to talk about, and it's what so many idiot defenders of the film do talk about. All those professional reviewers who say variants of, "It looks so gorgeous I sometimes forgot to even notice the plot." All those people you'll find in your YouTube comment section, and there's plenty of them under the mini review I did on my second channel saying, Well, it doesn't matter if the characters aren't great, it doesn't matter if the plot doesn't make sense, none of that's supposed to be there. You're just supposed to marvel at how brilliant it looks, as though that's the point and purpose of a narrative storytelling media like cinema. There is, I'd say, a distinct and, well, at least to me, a distracting unreality to the visuals, though. It's impossibly and impeccably beautiful, it's untouched, it's undespoiled, not so much Pandora as Eden. And I'd argue that this approach, aesthetics as distraction, is to miss the point of aesthetics, which is as much about application as it is to anything else. Not just what is beautiful, but why is it beautiful and what is this beauty in service of? Visual storytelling demands that what is beautiful to the eye augments what is beautiful to the ear and, most importantly, what is beautiful to the brain. If a film attempts to leverage one against the other, the visual against the cognitive, the eyes against the other inputs to the cerebrum, it becomes less beautiful for that conflict, because it's not actually conveying anything. It is, again, the Feelies. It's designed for base visual stimulation. The film also entirely fails to find meaningful contrast. The film has two principal modes. It has beauty and it has ugliness. Ugliness is reserved for the colonizers: smoke, fire, ashes, dirt, metal. Beauty is reserved for literally everything else. Anywhere we are that the colonizers are not is beautiful, and we spend the vast majority of our time away from the colonizers. I'm sure I'm not alone, now watching as Sully's kids go through another extended Wonderlust sequence in their first exposure to their underwater world, in finding the initial effect is beginning to wear off if it hasn't worn off already. I get it. It looks lovely. Look at all the colors. Look at all the wonderful creatures. Look at the patterns in nature. Wonder at it all. Wonder at it some more. Look, here's another fish. Wonder at it. Here's a pretty coral reef. Wonder at that. Look at the slender Smurf girl swimming. Wonder at her. Just enough already. And it's all accompanied by the kind of music I associate with the aquarium footage my dentist plays while you're strapped to a medieval torture chair. Unobtrusive, unremarkable, vaguely pretty, and on and on and on it all goes. Inconveniently, while underwater, they speak in some kind of sign language, and so the subtitles are back and I have no idea what they're saying. Fortunately, absolutely none of the dialogue in this film has been in any way meaningful, and most of it is completely unnecessary to make sense of the scene. Not a good thing in any other context, but quite useful if you can't understand subtitles. So, I don't think we're going to miss much by losing whatever they're saying to each other here. Back in Ugly Town with the colonizers, Spider leads Chip Hazard and the Smurf Marines into the jungle for some reason. And then, because the film has new visuals but no new ideas, we're back with the Sea Smurfs learning to ride the Fauna. Remember how in the first film Sully had to learn to fly the pterodactyls? Remember how that was wonderful? Well, now the kids have to learn to ride the sea creatures. It looks wonderful, but it is exactly the fucking same. What is the point of this film? Why does it need to exist? What's its purpose in life, other than to piss me off and soothe the minds of morons with its pretty visuals? The first film stole all of its plot, and the sequel is stealing everything from the first one. But why bother? What are you adding to society, James? What are you giving to the culture? What about this story did you feel some pressing need to tell again? Honestly, at this point, the only pleasurable realization is that for as long as James Cameron is obsessing over this zombie franchise, he won't have time to cock up any other much-loved franchise. And in case you hadn't had enough, the exact same thing plays out with Sully, who's being taught how to ride a flying fish by Big Chief Sea Smurf. He gets the flying bit right, as you'd expect, but he falls off underwater, though nobody told Big Chief Sea Smurf to act as though he had fallen off underwater because he acts as though he saw it happen, looking into the air with anticipation, and then grimacing at the fall he hasn't actually seen because it happened under the fucking water. And in case you still hadn't had enough of it, we're back with the kids who have a bit more luck riding some mini Leopleurodons. And then we get a nice long segment where the Sea Smurfs teach them how to breathe, and it goes on, and it goes on, and it goes on, and it goes on, and then they're underwater riding the Leopleurodons again, and then they're above the water again in the sunset being congratulated for learning how to breathe. This is all taking, I've actually lost count, 10, 15, 20 minutes. This kind of self-indulgent shit is why the film is over 3 hours long. You could condense its new story elements down to about 2 minutes. We then jump back across the jungle, where Spider... You've got to be fucking joking. No, we're back in the jungle where Spider is teaching Chip Hazard how to ride the goddamn motherfucking Fauna. And having complained that the previous waste of time was a waste of time because it was just repeating the first film, this one is even more closely repeating the first film. It's repeating it exactly and entirely. This is an absolute waste of time, with the added nonsense being that Spider is actively helping a bunch of evil Smurf Marines who know far less about the jungle and its secrets and are far less capable of navigating it than he does and is. He hasn't been tied up, he's not in chains, he's not shackled. There are a myriad of ways and opportunities for him to escape them. But nah, he's just happily going along, leading them toward the Smurfs, despite having no reason to do so and every incentive, and not to mention opportunity, to get away from them. This is an unintended trope, but it's increasingly common and it's increasingly bloody irritating. Take for another example, Wong in Multiverse of Madness. Wanda captures Wong and tortures his friends until he agrees to lead her to the evil Doom Temple. He then takes her up to the evil Doom Temple, but now it's just the two of them. There's no one else she can hurt. He's the only one who can interpret the symbols on the walls of the Doom Temple, who can tell her about the story they relate, the mechanics that she needs to exploit. She'd have had no way to tell if he was lying. He has uncounted opportunities to lie to her, to mislead her, to delay her, and to frustrate her, and she would have no way of forcing him to tell the truth, even assuming she ever spotted that he wasn't telling her the truth. But because he's a captive now, the film just has him do whatever she says, help her in any way he can, because, you know, that's what the plot needs to happen. Well, the self-same thing is occurring here. Spider has no incentive to help the Smurf Marines. He has every incentive to delay them, to frustrate them, to lead them astray, not to mention to escape them, bearing in mind that he's leading them to a Smurf community he grew up with, and the very clear, if only implicit threat is that the Smurf Marines will kill his family if they find them. Why is he helping them? But no, he just happily goes along helping them, telling them everything they need to know, generally being an all-round useful little loincloth chap. Because, you know, that's what the plot needs to happen. Absolute garbage tier writing once again. I got in trouble on Twitter for suggesting that some of the writing in this film is actually worse than Phase 4 of the MCU. I didn't say all of the writing is, I don't think all of the writing is, but at its worst, this film does contain elements that are worse than Phase 4 of the MCU. This section isn't one of them, this section is just as bad as Phase 4 of the MCU, as I think I've demonstrated by comparing it with a scene from Phase 4 of the MCU. Chip Hazard eventually masters the bird thing, not that we give a shit, and then we're back with the Sea Smurfs, where we are still learning how to breathe and how to swim and how to fuck Leopleurodons or whatever they're supposed to be doing, while a voiceover says pseudo-profound things about the sea being darkness and light and life and death, the sea is always right, etc. My god, 2022 has been a bumper year for terrible ocean-related dialogue. We've had Rings of Power, Wakanda Forever, now Avatar The Last Smurfbender, and all of them within months of each other. By the way, I've condensed all of that into a paragraph. The film isn't anything like so generous. I've never been accused of being more concise than the thing I'm reviewing, but in this example, I have no choice to be, because the film just goes on and on and on. It's like a pretty screensaver, and just as deep and full of meaning. I'm reliably told that even people who liked the film thought this middle act dragged. If that's so, then fucking my god. No, we will survive. We'll survive this. We have to. Once we get above the water again, the film decides that what we've really all been wanting all along is for Avatar the teen drama. So we now get an extended angsty teenage nonsense sequence from the kids who get into a fight with the Sea Smurf kids because they're picking on them. Meaning Soddy Smurf has to have a father-son chat with the Smurf fam because, you know,
family.
Smurfette has a mother-daughter chat with Daughter Smurf, who is upset that she can't be like everyone else because, you know,
family.
The Smurf boys are told to make friends, and they go out hunting, and then the screensaver comes on again. There's absolutely no point describing any of it. If you want a mental image, imagine James Cameron jerking off over David Attenborough's Blue Planet. It's just lovely visual after lovely visual, and on and on and on it goes. One of the more interesting parts of Blue Planet concerns sharks, and the film now decides to do an extended Jaws sequence. As one of the Sun Smurfs gets lost out at sea and gets attacked by a shark. What is any of this doing for the story, you may ask? Well, not much, I think is the answer. This film has broken records for the most expensive filler ever put on film, ever so slightly beating the Botox budget and keeping up with the Kardashians. Smurf Boy hides from the shark in a reef, but he runs out of breath. And then he goes to swim to the surface, but the shark attacks him again, but then the shark is attacked by a bigger fish.
There's always a bigger fish.
Thank you, Qui-Gon, and there's always a prequel meme. Fishboy runs out of breath again, and we think he's going to drown, but then he wakes up on what seems to be an island, but turns out to be a whale. And we like whales, so he thanks it for saving his life. It has a harpoon in its fin, he pulls it out. Yay, we're doing that trope now. The whale is very happy, and then the screensaver turns on again. This time, it's the whale doing orchestral, get it? Orchestral, I'm so sorry. Orchestral maneuvers in the dark, taking Smurf Boy for a tour of the ocean depths, because you see, they're making friends. The film is going to try and make out that Fishboy has no friends. This is going to be a very important plot point for later in the film. His only friend is a whale that he just met, knows nothing about, and just decides he can communicate with. I don't think he's actually got that information beforehand either, but no, he just knows he can communicate with it via sign language, because everything is connected in this film, don't you see? Back at Sea Smurf Central, Daughter Smurf is still sad, so Sully Smurf has a father-daughter chat with her.
There's always room for family.
His daughter hears the heartbeat of God. She says it's mighty. Lest you think we might be going anywhere with that, not really, that's also just kind of filler. That's always the way with this film. It goes through the motions of character and world building, but it builds neither. It is just the motions, included out of some sense of obligation. I suppose the film wants to make it seem as though it's much deeper than it is. None of it has any real depth or meaning. It is pure superficiality, given the gloss of the profound in the hope that it tricks people into thinking this is anything other than glitter on a turd. The whale takes Smurf Boy home. He bails out Big Chief Sea Smurf's son, who tricked him into being attacked by a shark in the first place, by taking the blame for being out at sea to begin with. And they're friends now. Although you would be forgiven for asking, why would he take the blame, given Big Chief Sea Smurf's son and his fishy little friends deliberately let him out to shark-infested waters? Well, that's not immediately clear. Why is the film taking time to show him making friends and earning respect when the film will go on to pivot on his belief that he has no respect and he has no friends? Yeah, that's not immediately clear either, but in this case, it won't ever be. It's very much worth noting, by the way, because it is incredibly relevant to the way this film and his character are going, that neither Sully Smurf nor Big Chief Sea Smurf actually believes him when he takes the blame that isn't his. He tells Sully Smurf that he was making friends, as he'd been told to do, hence bailing out Big Chief Sea Smurf's son. He was lying and everybody knew it. Sully Smurf knew he was lying, Big Chief Sea Smurf and his wacky wife also knew he was lying. They share a knowing look with Sully Smurf and chastise their son anyway. So everyone knows Smurf Boy was, essentially, doing the politically savvy thing. And yet, when he chats with Sully Smurf after the family meeting, Sully criticizes him and tells him that he's brought shame on the family. But no, he hasn't. That was the point of the knowing looks and the chastisement of Big Chief Sea Smurf's son. The fam hasn't been dishonored in the eyes of anyone that matters. Quite the opposite, in fact. Everybody knows that Smurf Boy took the blame in a bid to improve relations between the Sully fam and the Sea Smurfs. Sully criticizing him after the fact for something everybody knows he hasn't done serves a purpose. As mentioned, the film is trying to convince us that Smurf Boy has no friends and he feels put upon. That will be very important in explaining his subsequent actions. But here, this goal is at cross purposes with the scenes preceding it. And by preceding it, I mean directly preceding it. Sully Smurf has no in-universe reason to criticize his son. He has every in-universe reason not to. The film only has an out-universe reason to have Sully Smurf criticize his son. James Cameron wants the story to develop in a particular direction, and so that's what must happen. The thing is, it's all very well sitting there in front of a blank sheet of paper, thinking to yourself, here's where I want my story to go. But you do actually have to write a reason into the story you're telling. Because James Cameron wants it to happen is not a reason emanating from Sully Smurf's mind in acting as he does. It cannot explain his actions in chastising his son. The only reason he chastises his son is because his son has to be an emo later in order for the plot to work. The fact it contradicts the preceding scene, that's a mild inconvenience. And then, we get the backstory for the whale. You know how when whales die and get washed ashore, their corpses bloat and bloat until they explode? Yeah, that's an apt metaphor for this film. We're getting whale bloat. The whale, we learn, is an outcast. He's all alone because he's been blamed for causing many deaths, for killing someone indeed. But Smurf Boy says the whale's his friend, and he goes out to meet him again, and he tells him he trusts him. And then the screensaver comes on again, and we get the umpteenth long, pretty swimming sequence. If you're bored of hearing me talk about all of this stuff, just imagine what it's like to actually watch it, because I'm condensing this. The film did not need backstory for a fucking whale, but you know what? I bet we are going to get some insane final battle where the whole planet rises up against the evil colonialists. I'm sure that's where we're going. I know I've been wrong before, because apparently having even the most basic expectations for this plot is to demand too much of it, but no, I'm reasonably certain that's where we're going, because, as you might recall, it happened in the first film, and if it happened in the first film, there is a 98% chance it will happen in this one as well, because that's how movie making works in the year 2022, and it goes on. The Smurf kids go to some temple of the Sea Smurfs' ancestors, where we find an underwater spirit tree. Because you remember there was a spirit tree in the first film, and this film is just the first film, but in a pretty new setting. So yeah, it's a spirit tree again, but this time it's underwater.
Now that's different.
It does, however, trigger a vision in Smurf Daughter, where she meets Ellen Ripley, who is her real mum. Remember, her birth is unexplained. I think she's actually voiced in this film by a de-aged Sigourney Weaver as well, which is just slightly strange, but this sequence is also very strange. They have a dream hug. Smurf Daughter asked Ripley why she, Smurf Daughter, is different from everyone else. Who was her father, she asks. But then Ripley Smurf gets yanked out of the dream, and Smurf Daughter has some kind of seizure, so they have to rush her home. Back at the village, a science Smurf arrives in a helicopter, and I am more than a little bit confused. Why, given the Smurfs can fly pterodactyls, etc., has the science Smurf arrived in a helicopter? Don't the evil colonizers have a way to track stuff like that? Wouldn't taking a helicopter increase the risk of being discovered? Additionally, how did Science Smurf know that he was needed? How did they communicate with each other? Additionally, how did he know where to come, given the whole point of Sully Smurf and his Smurf family coming out here was to go into hiding? Additionally, why did Sully Smurf and his Smurf family come all the way out here to go into hiding? Because they feared the enemy had captured Spider, who, I should mention, they haven't talked about once since he was kidnapped, despite him being their foster kid, but fuck it. Why do that, though, when the Science Smurfs now know where you are too? They can contact you, and so they could give away your location if they were captured, just like Spider. Remember how the evil colonizers arrived in spaceships? Remember how those spaceships are still up in orbit? Remember how they are incredibly technologically advanced, with arsenals including all kinds of fancy scanner tech? Do you mean to tell me that they don't have anything up there that could detect the existence of the Sea Smurfs, or that could track the flight of birds Sully Smurf and Smurf Fam used to get here, or that could track fucking helicopters used by Science Smurf to come out and heal Smurf Daughter from her epileptic seizure? They can't do any of that? Meanwhile, Spider, whose capture necessitated their going into hiding, but whom they apparently don't care enough about to so much as mention, never mind fear for his safety, well, he's willingly helping out Chip Hazard on a side quest in order to track Sully Smurf and Fam to the place they left fucking hours ago. There is quite an extraordinary amount that's wrong with all of this. I think the short form explanation is that it makes precious little sense, but, well, we're only halfway through the film, so we're not going to dwell on it yet, because there's more important nonsense to get onto. The Science Smurfs can't seem to figure out what's wrong with Daughter Smurf, which pisses off Smurfette. Big Chief Sea Smurf's wife, who you might remember considered all the Smurf fam demons until pretty much this scene, and who I suppose I should point out is pregnant because there's a chance that'll be relevant later, well, she's apparently overcome her deep-rooted religious antipathy toward the demon Smurf fam, and she turns up offering to help heal Daughter Smurf. So the Science Smurfs duly get out of the way, and Big Chief Sea Smurf's wacky wife decides to use acupuncture to heal Daughter Smurf. As she's doing all of this, Sully Smurf is informed by the Science Smurfs that his daughter has epilepsy, and the non-Smurf science friend who came along for the ride delivers this fantastic line:
"If she seizes underwater again, it could kill her."
The phrase, "no shit Sherlock," was coined for you, my friend. Well fucking done. Top observation work. I'm so glad you popped up in this film to tell us things that are so blindingly obvious that fans of the film might otherwise have missed them. Acupuncture cures Daughter Smurf, and then she has a cry. Meanwhile, up in the sky, Chip, Hazard, and the Smurf Marines are flying about on the pterodactyls, and Chip and Spider are becoming friendly.
Traitor!
Spider, who you might remember was brought up and raised by the Smurfs, and who never spent any time at all with his father, and who loathed even the memory of his father until right now. Now, he's teaching Chip some Smurf words, and they're having a laugh together. And then, finally, something halfway sensible happens. Chip is informed by radio that a radar did indeed track the Science Smurfs gunships to the Sea Smurfs Islands. 5 points to the evil colonizers for remembering that they are actually allowed to use the technology that got them to this planet to begin with, almost an hour and 40 minutes into the film. But 5 points deducted from Sully Smurf and Science Smurfs because how the fuck did they not expect that this would happen? I accept that stupidity is this film's meta, but characters in universe aren't supposed to assume that their opponents are stupid. The only way bringing Science Smurfs out wasn't going to attract attention is if Sully Smurf assumed the evil colonizers would be too dense to bother tracking the skies from orbit, which categorically doesn't work, because if he assumes that they're dumb and that they're useless, he had no reason to take the drastic course of action he took in abandoning his tribe and taking his family across the planet to hide with the damn Sea Smurfs in the first place. The only way out of this, which is an imperfect way out, is if you assume that Sully Smurf was so scared for the life of his daughter that he decided to take a known risk in inviting the Science Smurfs over. But A, the film doesn't set this up at all, and B, the Science Smurfs were totally fucking useless anyway. Big Chief Sea Smurf's wacky wife healed the daughter, and they already knew she was a healer because that is Smurfette's justification for yeeting the Science Smurfs from the tent. Now look, I consider myself a very lucky guy. Not only do I get to do this for a living, but I'm also privileged to have a small role as a writer for a video game at the moment. And no fucking spoilers, sorry. But it's been a fascinating insight into how a good writer's room is supposed to work. Issues like this, botched setups, baffling contradictions, unsupported conclusions, things that arise from thoughtlessness and carelessness are not or should not be normal. I get to sit in on writers' rooms. Every decision taken by a character in that writer's room, no matter how big or how small, every event in the plot is thoroughly examined. All of it has to make sense. The chain of sense must be unbroken from first principles to end action. If there is a break somewhere in that chain, it has to be discussed. Does the break in fact exist? Why is it a break? Is the break really what we think it is? Can it be patched up with the insertion of a line of dialogue, an action, further back in the story, something later in the story that can retroactively explain it, perhaps? This isn't just true of important characters, it is true of every character and every decision that's made. This is the point of having a writer's room to begin with. Only once you can say, with a high degree of certainty, that there is no break in that chain, or that the break has been repaired, is that plot beat, that line of dialogue, that character action accepted. Yep, it takes a good long while. Yep, it's more expensive than just throwing shit at a wall and hoping some of it sticks. But that is how you get a well-rounded story and well-rounded characters that make sense. In a film as big as Avatar, with as much money behind it, with so much time having been spent on it, with such big studio backing it, there is no excuse for not taking this approach. And yet we see it all the time in big budget productions. The only explanation for that is carelessness. You don't make mistakes like this if you care about the story you're telling and the characters who inhabit it. The prosecution would like to enter exhibit number 15,791 into the record. James Cameron does not give a shit about the story he's supposed to be telling. It is all an excuse for stuff to happen. To hell with logic, to hell with consistency. And I've had some people point out in my comment section on my second channel that this is all James Cameron has ever done, and that that's what makes him so good. Apparently, you just had to switch your brain off in order to watch Terminator 2, or Aliens, or The Abyss. But no, that's not true. People who say that have already turned their brains off. It's the kind of thing you can only say if your brain has been switched off. It's certainly true that James Cameron hasn't created thoughtful entertainment in the last, God knows, decade or more? Actually, longer than that because the first Avatar is 13 years old. Shall we say 2 decades, perhaps? But it wasn't true of his great films that everybody loves and remembers. You can't simply say, well, because they're action films, they don't have to make sense narratively. No, the characters actually make sense in Terminator 2. Their motivations are fleshed out. Their relationships make sense. The action that takes place on the screen has been set up and is justified, and is done with as much of a mind to realism as you can get in a science fiction story about a time-traveling machine who comes back in time to murder a small child. Some care and attention was placed into the crafting of that story. Ditto with Aliens. Avatar is not comparable to those films. You cannot say James Cameron has always done this, therefore there is nothing wrong with Avatar, because you're flatly wrong about that. He didn't used to do that. There's a reason I and many others like those old films and fucking despise this one, because something about what James Cameron does has changed. Something about what he does has been lost. And then on top of all of that, where exactly were the Smurf Marines going when they got the message? To where were they flying? Where was Spider leading them? The film does just seem to have accepted that Spider should be leading the people he hates toward where he thinks the people he loves are, for absolutely no reason whatsoever. But it does rather seem as if this was not especially present in the minds of its characters. They seem to have just been flying to fill time in some kind of holding pattern until the plot could catch up and send them in the right direction. Except they don't immediately go to where the signal was picked up, because instead they teleport back to base, where Chip Hazard tells World Commander Woman that the signal was lost over open water. Why? But that they could project its course and its speed, and that creates a trajectory pointing toward a group of islands. World Commander Woman complains that there are hundreds of islands. Gee, such a shame you don't have spaceships in fucking orbit, eh? Chip Hazard, though, tells her that Sully Smurf must definitely be there, and if she gives him enough ships and aircraft, he'll bring back his scalp. You might remember, dear viewer, or you might not, because it was an eternity ago, but you may or may not remember that World Commander Woman doesn't really have much skin in this particular game. Chip Hazard is on a mission to kill Sully Smurf because he told himself he needed to get revenge for Sully Smurf killing him, even though he hadn't killed him at the time he left the message, and he never believed that he would. But, fucking setup, isn't it wonderful? World Commander Woman is only interested insofar as killing Sully Smurf will, and I quote, pacify the natives, to allow for the human colonizers to get control of the planet. But, as this film took care to tell us back when we were first introduced to them, the Sea Smurfs are not and have never been at war with the colonizers. That was their reason for not wanting to take in Sully Smurf and the Smurf fam to begin with. The hostiles are the Tree Smurfs. Sully Smurf was important because he was the leader of their insurgency. But now, he's not the leader of the insurgency. He's in hiding over with the peaceful Sea Smurfs. So Chip Hazard is asking World Commander Woman to lend him an army of ships and mechs and God knows what else to go hunting for a man who just isn't in the fight anymore, thereby starting a war with an entirely unrelated and peaceful tribe of Sea Smurfs in order to pacify the Jungle Smurfs. You and I can sit here and we can do the work these writers were too damn lazy to do themselves if we want to. We might venture, for example, that the evil colonizers do not know that Sully Smurf isn't leading the Jungle Smurf insurgency anymore. They might think that he's over with the Sea Smurfs to raise some kind of rebellion there. The evil colonizers know of the existence of the Sea Smurfs because World Commander Woman complains that there are hundreds of villages to search, which makes it difficult. Though if they know the Sea Smurfs are over there, then they will probably have noticed that they are not at war with them, which weighs against any decision to invade them. But let's continue this hypothetical train of thought that they might have had the writers not been hacks. They think Sully Smurf is actually over there to incite the Sea Smurfs to join his insurgency, in which case it might be reasonable for them to take an interest in that part of the world to pursue Sully Smurf over there to stop his plan before it bears fruit and he gains more soldiers for his cause. That, I think, would be a tenable explanation. You might still say that invading Sea Smurfs on the back of this complete lack of information would still be a gross overreaction on the part of the Marines, but against that I'd wager every war the US has fought since Vietnam. No, overreaction isn't the problem with that hypothetical explanation, however. The problem with the explanation is that none of it is in the film. The film hasn't considered any of it. The film doesn't care about the where, the what, the how, and the why of it. The film is only concerned that it happens, even if it happening leads to an expansion of a war that the Marines are already struggling to fight. And so, because that's what Jimmy Cameron wants, that's what Jimmy Cameron gets. If you ever find yourself defending a film by saying, okay, but the characters could be thinking X, or the character could have concluded Y, check thyself, motherfucker. You are not being paid tens of thousands of dollars to write the screenplay for them. You are watching a finished product. Do the characters think this and conclude this in the script as it is written? No, they don't. That is as far as you need to go. And just like that, Chip Hazard gets his armada, or rather, he doesn't. He has to commandeer an armada. There is already a big hovercraft thing and a bunch of useless helicopters heading out to sea. Chip, Spider, and the Smurf Marines fly over to it. The crew of the ship apparently haven't been told of his arrival, though, because they see some Smurfs riding pterodactyls toward them, and one of the hovercraft crew says, "Bogies inbound." Luckily, though, they are incredibly lax, and their immediate response is not to open fire, so they just wait around until the pterodactyls land, and then they learn that the Smurf Marines are the good guys they've been told are coming. They have a bit of a briefing. For no very obvious reason, they are just letting Spider wander around during all of this, overhearing all of their plans, taking in all of this very valuable information, despite him being a prisoner with, supposedly at least, obvious remaining sympathies for the enemy they're drawing their plans against. Wait, did I say obvious? No, actually they're not obvious, that they are presumed, because the story really demands that he should have them, but the plot sort of has forgotten that, hence him being so very helpful to the Smurf Marines. Not only has his family shown no concern whatever for him, he's shown no concern whatever for them. I do love me some good character writing. The ship, incidentally, is not, in fact, military. It is a whaling ship. The captain complains that he has whale quotas to meet, and he's not happy about being dragged off to search hundreds of Sea Smurf villages. Should we spend some time wondering why it is that this vast military force doesn't have a single actual military ship and crew to spare for this mission? Should we ask why it is that they really need a ship at all, given they could just fly there and it would all be much quicker? Or should we just assume that this will be necessary for some stupid action sequence later on? Yeah, I think that's probably the safer bet. James Cameron already has the action sequence in mind. For some reason, it's going to require a whaling ship and some helicopters, so that's why they get the whaling ship and the helicopters, even though it would have made so much more sense for them to have got something else. Over with the Sea Smurfs, some sort of horn goes off to signal that a pod of whales has returned, prompting Sully Smurf to talk about endless cycles of migration. Everyone is very happy that the whales are back, so on goes the screensaver again. Yep, it all looks lovely. There are whales, and there are baby whales. The whale families meet the Sea Smurf families, which we know because Sully Smurf tells us that all of this is happening with his trademark lack of inflection.
It was a time for stories. Of their season apart. Of deaths and births. Of old friends and new loves.
In case you were wondering, the film wants us to know that the natural world is one big happy family. The Smurfs and the whales are, quite literally, best friends. It's all part of Gaia, don't you see? Unlike the evil colonizers who do evil things like rape and pillage and, try and save their civilization from extinction. Remember that? Remember how that brand new piece of incredibly important information has made it into a grand total of one line of dialogue, and how it ought to profoundly shift our view of this entire conflict but hasn't done anything of the kind because it's never been mentioned again, and nothing has ever been made of it? Yes, I am so glad we've had so many hours of pretty screensaver stuff, otherwise we might have actually had something resembling a moral dilemma to grapple with. We might have actually had to think, and thought is this film's nemesis. Smurf Boy, though, is sad because he's friends with the outcast whale, and this pod is presumably the pod from which he's outcast? Remember that? Remember how that new piece of information made it into a grand total of one scene so far and ought to have profoundly shifted our view of that society, but hasn't done anything of the kind because it's never been mentioned again and there's nothing been made of it? Yeah, but those screensavers are really pretty though, right? I mean, they're really something. Then some other Sea Smurfs are sad because we hard cut over to a village where Chip Hazard and the Smurf Marines have arrived and are interrogating them, asking them if they've seen Sully Smurf anywhere around these parts. The Sea Smurfs say no, they haven't seen Sully Smurf, so one of the Smurf Marines shoots a Leopleurodon, and all the Sea Smurfs get very upset about it. Spider takes this opportunity to remember that he is a character with morals sometimes, and he starts complaining that the Smurf Marines are doing bad things and that this is very wrong. We know he thinks this because that is exactly what he says. He says,
Please don't do this. This is wrong. What you're doing here is wrong.
Spider is honestly such a peculiar character, in that he's not really a character. Nothing, absolutely nothing about him has been done right, and yet he's still made it into the final draft of the script. We've already gone over his bizarre non-reaction to events, how he was bitterly opposed to the evil colonizers because he was brought up by the Smurfs, only then to be found cheerfully helping out the evil colonizers track down the Smurfs the moment he was captured, because he's building a relationship with the blue Smurf clone of a father he's never met but knew was very evil. So his motivation, it's not so much broken as it is non-existent. Now the script demands that he remember which side he's kind of on sometimes, and so when Chip Hazard has a gun pointed at the head of a Sea Smurf woman, and he demands that Spider tell her husband to fess up if he wants his wife to live, Spider says, "No, stop doing this. What you're doing is wrong." which is slightly messed up because he's refusing to translate a message that would actually have saved the woman's life, at least potentially. But that's not really the problem with this scene. The problem with this scene is dialogue and acting. The first of these actually stems from his motivation. Because the film hasn't taken the time to give him anything like a moral character, or indeed any character at all, it has no trouble lazily having him repeat convenient lines when the plot wants to pluck on this or that heartstring. What did Spider think the Smurf Marines were going to do to the Smurfs once he'd led them right to them, which he was happily doing until this exact moment? Did he think about it at all? No, he didn't, because the writers weren't thinking about it at the time either, so the characters they're writing couldn't be. Now faced with a tame version of what would inevitably have been done to the Smurfs, Spider's moral imagination has been turned on again. But this is entirely unformed. The dialogue is shallow and surface level. Hello, my name is Spider. This is exactly what I'm feeling in this moment. What I'm feeling in this moment is really what I should have anticipated happening in this moment, but didn't anticipate happening in this moment because the plot needed me to be doing the opposite thing earlier. What you're doing is wrong, though. I stubbed my toe and I am in pain. I prefer Cheerios to cornflakes because cornflakes get soggy when you leave them in the milk for too long, and that is bad. So yeah, his motivation is screwed. Moral imagination and character, that's non-existent, meaning the dialogue is screwed also. And then on top of that, we have the acting range. The Critical Drinker once described Daisy Ridley's acting range as specific, which is a brilliant line I wish I'd come up with. Spider, though, is a bit more limited even than that. He doesn't really do acting at all. There's no specific scene in which what he does is good, or even approaching good, because he doesn't really do anything. He's just a teenage boy in a loincloth who's given occasional lines to say because nobody else is around to say them. So motivation is screwed, moral imagination and character are non-existent, dialogue is screwed, acting is bad. Can it get any worse? Why, yes. Yes, it can. Because he's also pointless. He has been pointless from the moment he was captured. His point was supposed to be that he could lead the Smurf Marines to the Jungle Smurfs, even though he should have had absolutely no incentive to do that whatsoever. But that's all gone now. That entire sequence, him leading them through the jungle, teaching them to fly pterodactyls, searching for the Smurfs, well, that's sort of been retconned after a fashion. Or at least its purpose and meaning has been retconned. It didn't need to happen, because it's affected nothing. It was essentially the film placing these characters in a holding pattern until the plot popped up and said, yeah, we need them over here now. At which point the radio message Ex Machina is used to point them in the right direction. That means that nothing Spider has done has had any effect, and he has no agency at all. The only thing he has left is this nonsensical father-son relationship with the Smurf clone of his dead dad who he never met, and always hated, because he was brought up, since he was a baby, believing that his dad was a villain, which he was. The film has been awkwardly trying to suggest that a relationship is forming, which is a terrible idea that's not supported by the character work, but accepting that it is an idea that the film is pursuing, it's not delivered anything on it at all. He goes from hating and hissing at Smurf Chip to happily leading him on a quest to find and murder his adopted family. We got one scene of them together on a pterodactyl with something that might just about be called banter. Now he's seen how evil his not father is again, which ought to remind him of what he should never have forgotten in the first place. His clone daddy is a cunt. But the film must have something in mind for him, even if it stripped him of everything save his loincloth. The only thing left is this father-son relationship that shouldn't exist, and doesn't exist, despite the film thinking that it should and does. So I imagine that'll be where the payoff is going to be found later, which we already know will be terrible because there isn't really anything to pay off to begin with. Now, despite my carefully cultivated reputation, I don't actually like seeing people... what am I saying? Of course I love seeing people fail, it's delicious. But this is a specific thing, it's not a general one. I don't like seeing people fail when they've done nothing to deserve it. I don't like seeing people fail when they've been given a very difficult job and their best hasn't been good enough. And let's be clear, this is a very difficult job. It's difficult because the actor, Jack Champion, is disarmingly young. I think he's been attached to this project since he was about 13. A huge amount of his scenes will have been filmed either entirely alone or on a soundstage with a bunch of weird-looking people doing mocap. It can't be easy to play off of that. Hell, even Ian McKellen almost cried with frustration at having to do green screen scenes for The Hobbit, with nobody to interact with. And he's been in this game for several centuries. So a young actor in a very difficult environment. Compounding that, he's been given very little to work with. The character he's playing is all but non-existent. You can only cook with what you have. So I feel for the guy, I really do. Maybe he is in fact quite talented. I hope he is. I hope he has a long and successful career until he starts spouting the opinions of Mark Ruffalo, then I'll happily ridicule him. but I am a critic, and I do have to point out that with all these qualifiers and provisos considered, he's done a pretty naff job even with what he's been given. He just doesn't emote, he doesn't carry his lines, he doesn't inject any real feeling into them. He had a credited role in Avengers Endgame when he was younger still. I think he was listed as Boy on Bike. Well, here he's really just Boy in Loincloth. There's nothing more to him than that. The vast majority of the fault, of course, lies with the writers and the director, but some of the blame does have to lie with him as well. He said in an interview that he was prepared for people to both love and hate his character, this having to do with a certain decision he makes later that we'll get to in about 5 years' time by the time I finish this script, but I think, unfortunately, that was premature and it was presumptive. I don't think anybody will love his character. I don't think anybody will hate his character. I don't think anybody will feel anything about his character at all, or even really remember him for more than a couple of weeks, or a month at best, because, well, he just doesn't have a character to which we can attach any emotion in the first place. Anyway, he has a moan about the Smurf Marines being mean, so Chip Hazard decides not to kill them. Instead, he just burns their village. Good job they all grew up surrounded by water, eh? And oh my god, it's still fucking going. Chip Hazard gets bored of burning villages and decides he'll need to bait out Sully Smurf instead. How, you might ask? Would he perhaps remember that he has Spider in captivity, and Spider is Sully Smurf's foster son, and he might then serve as useful bait? No, he doesn't. Instead, he's going to hunt some whales. Why, you might ask? Well, you see, because the Sea Smurfs consider the whales to be part of their family, so hunting the whales will piss them off and they will attack. That, by the way, answers the question raised however long ago it was. Why did this vastly powerful invading army not have any military ships to send? Why did they have to commandeer a whaling vessel? Well, you see, because this has to happen. Because James Cameron wanted to make sure that we know that nature is good and capitalist colonizers are bad, unless we haven't been smacked so many times in the head by this motif that our brains are leaking out of our ears. Because an attack on nature is an attack on us all. Because he wanted to have Chip Hazard bait out Sully by going at the whales like a Japanese man with a temper. That is why it was so vitally important to do something so nonsensical as commandeering a whaling ship for a military mission. But then you might point out, Chip Hazard didn't know that this was his plan until after he'd commandeered the vessel, which makes it very fucking lucky that the vessel they commandeered, even though they didn't need to, just happened to be a whaling ship. And you would be absolutely right to point that out. But you see, this bizarre pattern, implausible decision giving post hoc justification, goes deeper still, because Chip has arrived at this whale hunting plan before he's learned what the significance of the whales is. He arrives back on the ship, and he explains his plan to the captain of the ship. A marine biologist guy then says, he's the human scientist, by the way, who came with Smurf scientist earlier, he's here now, and he says, no, you don't understand. The Sea Smurfs really love these whales. If you attack them, it'll be like attacking their family. To which Chip Hazard says, exactly. So wait up. I'm a little bit confused. I'm a little bit confused about a number of things. Most importantly, why would it ever occur to Chip Hazard that attacking whales would bait out the Sea Smurfs if he didn't yet know about the whales' significance? He knew nothing about the Sea Smurfs before he got here. He knows very little about them now. He's never encountered the whales. The film, I think, attempted to set this up when it had one of the Marines shoot a Leopleurodon. That clearly made the Sea Smurfs very upset, but it's a bit of a leap from that to, therefore killing a whale will start a war that will draw out not only the Sea Smurfs, but this one very specific guy who happens to be hiding with them. On top of all of which, the marine biologist who confirmed that this would happen after he'd already concocted the plan, who I think is the non-Smurf scientist we saw earlier when Smurf daughter had her epileptic seizure. I can't believe this is all in the same film, but whatever. Anyway, he knows how sacred the whales are. He's a Smurf sympathizer. Some of his best friends are Smurfs, and yet here he is, very conveniently, serving on a whale ship for the purposes of exposition. I mean, well, okay, it's not impossible. Scientists do in fact piggyback on all sorts of commercial shipping enterprises in the real world. It's a cheaper alternative to funding entire research ships. I don't know if scientists routinely travel on actual whaling vessels in the real world, but let's assume that they do, and let's assume that some of them are a bit morally uncomfortable with whaling as an industry, as people generally are. There's a big difference between going along with a whaling ship, even though you find whaling distasteful, and going along with a whaling ship while believing that whales are gods. And we're told over and over about the interconnectedness of Pandora, the boilerplate spiritualism that infuses all of its nature, this knockoff Gaia in which every living thing is a connected part of a whole. Do you mean to tell me that a scientist who understands all of that, who sympathizes with its constituents, and who may even believe in it himself, that he would willingly go on a god-murdering whaling ship for what? Data? That beggars belief. But hey, if he weren't here, who would be around to provide the audience with much-needed exposition of this basic mechanic? Oh my god, this film is giving me a migraine. Over with the Sea Smurfs. Smurf Boy is chilling with Outcast Whale. For some reason, the film has decided that they have a lot in common. Outcast Whale is an actual outcast, while Smurf Boy, he feels like an outcast. He says he feels all alone too, just like his whale bro. But why? For what reason? I think he's moaned about something vaguely similar before, but once again, why? Where has this character trait come from? What about his character supports this conclusion? And why is his only true friend a fucking whale? You know what the film is attempting to go here? That sort of emo younger brother feeling outcast from his family is a trope in many films. There's nothing in this film that isn't a trope in many better films that came before it, but you do actually have to work your way to that conclusion. You do sort of have to do some character work to justify why the character thinks that way. Nothing that I've seen in this film could justify that. The film is comfortably over 3 hours long, yet every single one of its character beats feels rushed, slapped on at the last second, no time for setup or interrogation. There is no reason for a film this long to have rushed its central characters. Its underlying motif is the want for family, and yeah, fine. This is an expression of that. But we don't really need this expression of it, because every other character is also an expression of it. If you got this far into the film without spotting what its theme is, one more example is not going to help you, because you've got the intellect and awareness of an Avatar fan. Repetition can be very helpful, but there comes a time when that repetition must stop. You can make a point, you can stress that point, but if you keep stressing that point, you begin to labor that point. You could have cut this entire subplot from the movie and you would have lost nothing because it adds nothing new at all. He asks the whale why it's an outcast, and to find out, Smurf Boy, well, he swims inside its mouth and it swallows him. Rightio. I mean, I really dread to think where this Jonah and the whale skit is going. Inside the whale, yep, I'm actually having to write this. My god, this film. Everything gets glittery. And then part of its throat opens up and it has some tentacles inside of it. Smurf Boy plugs his USB cable into the tentacles, and that gives us flashbacks to an attack on the whales by the evil colonizers at some point in the distant past. I think the message here is supposed to be that he wasn't, strictly speaking, an outcast, or rather, he wasn't an outcast because he went and wantonly murdered people, which is the story we've learned about him so far. Rather, the colonizers killed his family. We assume, by the way, that the whales and the Sea Smurfs featured in the flashback had nothing whatever to do with the Sea Smurfs we now know and spend our time with, because we've very clearly been told that these Sea Smurfs are not at war with the colonizers. Though we are also, and inconveniently, told that attacking the whales would bring the Sea Smurfs out to war. That's Chip Hazard's plan, remember? So, does attacking whales only bring some Sea Smurfs out to war? It can't bring them all out to war, because if it did, they'd already be at war. Because we just had a flashback to an attack on the damn whales that didn't result in our current troop of Smurf people going to war. I'm sure we'll come back to this momentarily, but for now, that's the whale's backstory out of the way. Thank God. So now we're back with the Sea Smurfs, where Big Chief Sea Smurf and his crazy wife are scandalized that Smurf Boy should have bonded with a whale they still believe was an outcast. It's unclear how much time has passed, by the way, since the scene of that flashback, but you would think Outcast Whale might have had some interaction with the other whales at some point, and they might have a better understanding of the fate of the other whale part, because, as you doubtless remember, we've been very clearly told that they all consider each other to be one big family. How then has the myth of the outcast whale survived, if he is not in fact a reckless murderer, but rather someone who acted in self-defense? Did it just never come up in conversation with any other whale that they know? I still can't believe that I'm writing this. Did it just not come up in conversation with any other whale they happen to know, or is there more to this particular myth than we've so far been told? Well, yeah, it's the latter. Big Chief Sea Smurf then embarks upon a history lesson in which he explains that For various reasons too corny to relate, killing among the whales is forbidden. This, by the way, must be a point of philosophical disagreement between the Sea Smurfs and the whales because, again, Chip Hazard's plan is to provoke them into war to protect the whales. If the Sea Smurfs are not so close as to share the whales' belief in non-violence, yeah, that's a tenable thing. If, on the other hand, the film wants to portray them as being so familiarly close that they also share the same religious worldview, then that's a problem with the film, but we'll see momentarily. For the moment, you'll have to bear with me, because I'm having a little bit of trouble making sense of this. Smurf Boy has a chat with pretty Sea Smurf Girl from earlier, who's played absolutely no role in the plot whatsoever, so naturally is his love interest now. He explains that Outcast Whale didn't kill anyone. His parents were killed in front of him, so he gathered some chaps together and attacked the Sky People, and the Sky People massacred them. He was the only survivor. But then, pretty Sea Smurf Girl replies that, by whale law, he is responsible for those deaths, so he is a killer.
From a certain point of view.
And he must always be an outcast. So, so as best as I can make out, these people live by extreme pacifism. Killing anyone, even in self-defense, is wrong. It's so wrong that if you act in self-defense and your friends get killed, you are the one held responsible for their deaths, even though they would plausibly have died either way, and you tried to protect them. So far, so bullshit. But Chip Hazard's plan is to bait the Sea Smurfs into attacking them in the name of self-defense. And he's told this will work by the marine biologist chap who informs him that the whales are like family to the Sea Smurfs and the Sea Smurfs will fight to defend them. Meaning, again if they share the whales' logic, philosophy and religion, that the Sea Smurfs will outcast themselves by defending the whales from attack, which they are equivalently religiously motivated to do. This doesn't make very much sense. Oh, and there's still more than an hour of the film still to go. Fuck it, I've made it this far, I'm turning to drink. Apologies in advance if the review becomes even more rambly and incoherent as it goes on. Let's face it, it'll still be less rambly and incoherent than this god-awful excuse for a movie. Little Jimmy Cameron is still, for some reason, besotted with the idea that he can cram a teen drama into a naturalist sci-fi action epic with environmentalist messaging, so when Pretty Smurf Girl tells Smurf Boy he should tell Big Chief Sea Smurf what he knows about Outcast Whale, for fuck's sake, this film, he says no. Nobody understands him, and I quote, "The whole planet hates me." Have I pointed out that absolutely none of this has been set up or established, and this character has absolutely no reason to be speaking these lines or thinking these things? And I think I have. But in case I haven't, none of this has been set up or established, and this character has absolutely no reason to be speaking these lines or thinking these things. You could cut this entire character out of the film, and the only difference it would have made thus far is that the film would have been shorter and considerably better, which is a sure sign as a filmmaker that you are doing a terrible job. He says, all the planet sees him as is an alien. Pretty Smurf Girl says, "I see you. You're one of us now." And we go over to the evil colonizers who are shooting tracking darts at whales. These whales are highly intelligent, by the way. They're capable of holding conversations. They have complex thoughts and conceptual awareness. They move in pods. You'd think they might then be smart enough to notice if they have big tracking darts sticking out of them and getting their friends to help remove them, but that would break the film, I guess, so whenever it's convenient, these super whales regress to mere whales in intelligence and in ability. You can't even give fucking animals character consistency, Jesus Christ, Cameron. The tracking implement having been implanted, a large team of colonizers mobilize for action. They have crab mechs, robots that look like crab and that walk like crab. They also have incredibly boring and modern, which is to say by the standards of this film, prehistoric, dinghies and speedboats, making for a bit of an aesthetic clash. This is, I suppose, the limitations of practical effects. You can CG the crabs, but you do actually need to film the boat sequences, and so we have to revert to existing technology. I'm not at all convinced there was no way to smooth this divide. The one thing this film has going for it is its visual effects. They've spent more time and money on that than on anything else. In fact, they've spent all their time and money on it, so there should really be no excuse for lingering rough edges like this. The attack on the whales then begins, involving some sort of sonic depth charges that for some reason force the whales to the surface even though they've been shot above the whales. This is because whales have echolocation sensors. To give the film some credit, the use of sonic weapons to control the whales' movements is otherwise reasonably well realized as a strategy. And the hunt sequence does make you feel for the whales and fucking hate the humans. The separation of the mother whale from the baby whale is another effective way of evoking tragedy and evil in roughly equal measure. Cameron clearly has real-life disgust at whaling in mind, and to give him his due, he evokes it reasonably well in this sequence. Yeah, I think it has taken 2 hours before I found something positive to say, which I'm sure would invite any defenders of this film to accuse me of hating it for hating's sake. This, though, is because I have very deliberately avoided commenting on the film's visuals as much as is possible, because this critique is, as I mentioned at the top, a critique of Avatar as Feelies, not as movies. When this much time, effort, and money has been spent getting the visuals right, and when the film is sold on no other basis, and also called the cinematic event of a generation, well then you would expect the visuals to be done right. That would be the most banal observation to make. That's the lowest bar for it to clear. But as I also mentioned at the top, visuals are but a necessary and not a sufficient condition for good filmmaking. And to the extent this film has met with any success at all, it's done so by relying on its visuals to distract from its writing, and its writing has been almost uniformly abysmal. We should be demanding better. That's why I'm not focusing on visuals. This, however, is an example of where it's narratively helpful to long out a scene, and so the first example of the pacing, the ideas, and the delivery done mostly right. Part of the trauma of whale hunting is precisely that these animals are very easy to hurt, but very hard to kill. The amount of time it takes to fell them, and the amount of pain inflicted in the felling of them, means you aren't allowed ignorance as an excuse. Nobody embarks on this kind of hunt unless they have full knowledge of what they're doing. Nobody can miss the suffering they cause because it goes on, and it goes on, and it goes on. In the case of whales particularly, which are intelligent and highly social animals, you can't really miss the psychological horror of it either, because you can't isolate the damage to one individual. You do in fact inflict it upon a family. In short, whaling is the clearest example of a practice that requires a self-inflicted psychopathic disregard for basic empathy, decency, and dignity. In killing the animal, you are dehumanizing yourself. One of the first things Rosa Luxemburg noticed about the character of the Nazis who imprisoned her was their callous mistreatment of animals. She correctly identified that inflicting needless cruelty on animals betrays a fundamental deficit in the moral character of the abuser, and pretty much all of this is evoked in the whale hunt sequence in The Way of Water. You can criticize it as too obvious, perhaps, too easy for the writer's perspective, the creator plucking the lowest of the hanging fruit in a bid to clarify a moral purpose and message that is already overtly transparent. You can accuse it of exploiting a grievance that's already common. No one is learning anything from this scene because public perception of whaling has plummeted through the floor in the last few decades. We already know to despise it. But if the sequence makes you feel uncomfortable, if it makes you feel sad or angry, if it moves you to despair, then it's done its job reasonably well. It's the first time in 2 hours of this film that I felt anything for what is happening on the screen, which is my get out from any accusation of just being nice about it, because the praise for this part is an implicit criticism of the rest. You shouldn't have one scene in a 3-hour film that's notable because it makes you feel something. It serves to highlight the paucity of feeling in everything around it. But given we found next to nothing else to praise so far, well, I figured it was important to at least highlight what it does right when it does right. Speaking of nothingness and emptiness, though, the eventual death of the mother whale is the first time I've noticed the soundtrack to the film. And I've only noticed the soundtrack because it's finally got around to deploying what seems to be James Horner's one and only motif. It's the Troy motif. Again. This film isn't even composed by Horner, but rather by his friend Simon Franklin, which perhaps explains the absence of the motif until this point. I don't think, anyway, that it's been deployed until now, or at any rate I don't remember hearing it deployed, but that's because I don't remember anything about the soundtrack at all. It's been bland and unobtrusive aquarium music until this point. And on a meta level, if your composer sees the film striving to reach an emotive peak, if he sees a scene that is so obviously intended to be significant, a climax moment, what does it say about that composer that he returns to the same 4-note motif that's been deployed in the first Avatar film and also in Troy and also in Willow and I'm pretty sure in a number of other films as well? How profoundly unimaginative do you have to be as a composer to only have one motif? What thematically links Willow, Troy, and the 2 Avatar films? I would venture next to nothing as my answer to that question. It harks back to the long-ish section on music and the leitmotif in particular in my last Rings of Power video. The leitmotif is the musical phrase you remember, that theme we associate with any given film. John Williams, with his Wagnerian inspiration, is a master of the leitmotif, which is why so many of his films are so memorable. One of the earliest criticisms of its deployment in film soundtrack was that it was intellectually lazy. This character is on the screen, so this theme plays. And to be fair, that is true of a lot of film soundtracks. The leitmotif deployed well is deployed in variations. Changes in instrumentation, in pitch, volume, and key, from the major to the minor, sometimes strong, sometimes weak. It's supposed to convey not just this character is on the screen, but This is what the character is doing, this is what the character is seeing, this is what the character is feeling, this is what is happening to the character, this is what that means, and this is what the world thinks about it, so to speak. James Horner, and by extension Franklin, in this film falls beneath even the lazy character theme form of the leitmotif. Horner apparently has just one musical phrase, which he can throw into a light-hearted 80s fantasy wheeze, a grand historical epic, and a grandiose sci-fi whale hunt. It has no association besides something dramatic is happening on the screen now. And Franklin is seeing something happening on the screen now, and rather than attempt to craft anything distinctive about his own score, he's just pinched Horner's signal. That is staggeringly lazy work. George Lucas called John Williams the secret source of Star Wars. He attributes his film's initial success to John Williams' soundtrack. When asked to compose for Schindler's List, Williams almost bowed out, telling Spielberg, "You need a better composer than I am for this film," to which Spielberg replied, "I know, but they're all dead." A high compliment, since what Spielberg is really saying here is that John Williams is the best composer alive. Everyone, I think including Peter Jackson, has acknowledged that the Lord of the Rings trilogy cannot even be imagined with any other soundtrack than Howard Shore's. Name any memorable movie of the last 20, 30, 40 years, and there's a good chance you can instantly recall whole sections of music from them. Jaws, Jurassic Park, Blade Runner, Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Indiana Jones, Gladiator, James Bond, Pirates of the Caribbean, Harry Potter, etc., etc. ad nauseum. Music is not an afterthought in cinema. Music is integral to cinema. The list of reasons the Avatar franchise has added nothing of any worth to the culture is too long to repeat. I think we've ventilated a fair few of its reasons during the course of this video so far, and there are more to come. It's coterminous with the list of reasons it has no strong place in cultural memory. But the one I've been trying to draw out across these last few paragraphs is because its soundtrack is of the same nature as its films. Thoughtless, emotionless, vapid, empty, and derivative. And being a bit of a film score fan, hearing this little motif now has subtracted pretty much the entirety of whatever positive feelings I had about the whale hunt sequence. What a fucking waste of ear space. Moving on with the plot, Spider has been watching all of this from aboard the whaling ship. He frowns, so we know that he's angry. We then get to go inside the dead whale, where they drill into its skull to extract mind goo. You will come to that in a second. Spider has gone into the whale with them because, I don't know, because he just has, that's his job. He has to stand around in his loincloth. He is an excuse for exposition, I guess. Science guy from earlier is the one doing the skull drilling. He tells Spider that the whales are quite possibly more intelligent than humans are, because they have more neurons or something. From this, he says that they are deeply emotional, which is fine, I guess. He also says that they are more spiritual. Well, I'm not sure you can get that from an MRI scan, my dude. And this is re-emphasizing anyway the problem I mentioned earlier. Here's a guy who, alone of all the chaps he's hanging around with, really understands the whales. He understands their significance to the Sea Smurfs. He understands their pseudo-religious importance. He understands their deep interconnectedness with nature. He understands that they are considered family by the Smurfs he is himself friends with, all of which was already enough to make his presence aboard a fucking whaling ship seem at the very least implausible. But now we find out that he doesn't just understand these things conceptually and from the outside, he understands them from the inside, literally as well as figuratively. He is, after all, currently drilling into the brain of a dead whale from inside of its mouth. But figuratively as well, in the sense that he understands these whales on much the same level as the Sea Smurfs do. He understands their consciousness, their thoughts, and their religiosity. He clearly sympathizes with them and with the planet of which they are such an integral part. As a thought experiment, let's say you are a scientist. You are intensely interested in human anatomy. Let's say that there's a psychopathic murderer out there who kills people, cuts them up, and sells their body parts. Would you, in the name of science, volunteer to go out with said psychopathic murderer and not only observe as he cuts up one of your own friends or family members, but actually do the cutting up yourself? Would you, in the name of science, watch your mother be murdered and then extract the brain juice from inside her mouth? Would that not be, to understate it just a little, morally problematic to you? By the way, I'm not exaggerating when I say that he's extracting brain fluid. That is actually what he's doing, and he continues expositing to Spider as they're doing it. He looks at the brain scan taken during the operation. He explains that they are highly emotional creatures. He says they have music, they have mathematics, they have science and philosophy. Fucking philosopher whales. He tells Spider all of this as he helps extract the brain fluid from inside its fucking mouth. Film, what are you doing? What it's doing is extracting brain fluid. Why though? Well, because, as the whaling ship captain helpfully informs us, the brain fluid stops human aging. Oh, my giddy fucknugget. I can't. Remember those good, quaint old days when we were just digging up spirit trees because we wanted unobtainium? Hell, I remember the good old days, several years ago when this film started, when we were on Pandora because the Earth was dying, which I have to keep pointing out occasionally because the film has entirely forgotten about it. But now, we are also here because the Earth is dying and there's whale brain juice that can stop human aging. Steaks, what even are steaks? Are those things that you eat? I think whales make good steaks. I think the film hasn't bothered interrogating these things because it just can't. These questions are too big for it. It's hard to make a film pondering the meaning of life when half of it is dedicated to aquarium screensavers. But if you have no intention of answering questions like this, it's usually a good idea not to raise them in the first place. None of this makes any sense. Forgetting entirely the "we have to save the human race" bit, which is exactly what the film wants us to do, apparently you have whales with brain goo that stops human aging as well. Do you have any idea how valuable that is? Why are there any whales left? Why isn't this a pivotal part of the colonizer's objective on the planet? Why did you divert a whaling ship and give it to Chip Hazard to pursue his personal vendetta against a guy who didn't even kill him, when that whaling ship would otherwise have been used to harvest brain goo that stops human aging? Which of these two objectives is the more valuable, do you think? Why is the business of harvesting brain goo that stops human aging apparently left to random private contractors with individual little whale ships? How did we find out about the brain goo? When did we find out about the brain goo? At one point, did a random person fancy killing a whale and then drilling into its skull and then injecting his brain goo into his scrotum probably, only to find out that he'd accidentally unlocked the secret to eternal life? Why are there any whales left if this is now widely known? Have any attempts been made to synthesize the whale brain goo, to mass produce it? What happens when this stuff is widely available? How does that change society? Whaling ship captain guy describes it as ounce for ounce, the single most valuable substance known to man. Is this all not too important to have been made into a side quest in the third act of the film? I have about 3 million other questions, by the way, one of the most important ones being, why do you even need to end human aging when your planet is dying, and your goal is long-term to move humanity over to Pandora, and you have the ability to make Smurf clones of yourself, which are already perfectly adapted to an environment that your humans can't actually breathe in without assistance? Are you going to have people living eternally on a dying Earth, or are you going to ship them all the way over here and then inject them with brain goo if they can afford it so they can live eternally when they could otherwise have spent less money getting Smurf clones for themselves, living better, uploading their consciousness whenever they die, doing the whole thing again? Do you see what I mean about how this film makes no damn sense? But as I'm sure you know by now, I'm very keen that I keep this video short and digestible, so I think we'll just park all of those issues and move on. Incidentally, Science Guy's presence is explained, and I use that word with its widest possible meaning, by whaling ship captain, who tells us that whale brain goo is paying for everything here on Pandora, including Science Guy's research. Science Guy quips, "That's why I drink." So there you have it. If you are ever arrested for being complicit in the murder of a demigod, you can just say, yeah, that's kind of shit, that's why I drink. And we'll all just move on as though it's perfectly normal. You have a mild regret. Nothing more needs saying. An unknown amount of time later, the Sea Smurfs discover the dead whales and have a bit of a cry. Big Chief Sea Smurf's crazy wife is especially upset because one of the dead whales was her spirit sister and apparently a good composer. There you go, James, you should have hired a fucking whale to compose your soundtrack. At least you'd have had one worth the name. The dead whale had a baby, and in case we weren't sufficiently aware of how sad we're supposed to be feeling, it starts raining. Because, pathetic fallacy, that's how high art works, guys. The Smurf Marines deliberately left evidence behind so the Sea Smurfs would know they were responsible. And, okay then, no, I'm just going to have to explain this bit. Yeah, so the Sea Smurfs have a war meeting. They said the war has now come to them. You might remember that, way back when, the prospect of Solly Smurf's war being brought to them was advanced as a reason not to take Solly Smurf's fam in. You might then expect some significant repercussions for Solly Smurf and fam. He's brought death to this peaceful community, as they feared he would. But nah. Then the film attempts to gloss over the fact that whales have been hunted on Pandora for ages without the Sea Smurfs doing anything about it. How does it do this? Well, in his big war speech, Big Chief Sea Smurf says, and I shit you not, we knew about the attacks on the whales, but it happened far away. Now it's here, and now we're pissed off. Proximity. Proximity is the issue, you see? If somebody kills your brother or your sister on another continent, that's fine, you're not really bothered. You have no problem with the person who killed them, you're not at war with them, you don't even want to be at war with them, you just want them to leave you alone. In fact, you're very keen that you don't risk being dragged into conflict with them. But if someone kills your brother or your sister a few miles down the road, well, that's unacceptable. Now you're mad. No. This is not how these things work, film. This is not how things work in the world you have yourselves created. You can't tell me that every living thing on this planet is part of a symbiotic system, and that the whales and the Sea Smurfs in particular are part of the same family, and then tell me that the Sea Smurfs are only bothered when their family are killed within a reasonable commute from where they happen to live. Absolutely not. No, you can't do that. These people have just as much of an incentive to be at war with the evil colonizers as the Jungle Smurfs from the last film. They should already be at war with them. They should absolutely not be trying to turn Sully Smurf away lest he bring the war to them. These colonizers have been murdering your family for years, you watery wankers. How are you only now getting angry about this? Sully Smurf tells the Sea Smurfs that the Sky People don't care about the Great Balance. They won't stop. The only solution is to tell the whales to run away. And this pisses off the Sea Smurfs. And one of them delivers what can only be described as pure concentrated cringe.
We'll fight to protect our brothers and sisters!
Look, okay buddy, I know you're made of computer code, but you don't have to act like a twat. Just stop that, please. Another consideration, Sully Smurf acts against Chip Hazard's presumption in this scene. You will recall that Chip's plan is to kill the whales to bring Sully Smurf out of hiding. But here, Sully Smurf is the one counselling caution. He's the one trying to avoid the war, trying to put the Sea Smurfs off of fighting, because if they do, the Sky People will destroy them. This is, shall we say, clumsy? Because it means that whatever other problems that exist with Chip's plan, we've added an extra element of luck to it. The plan works, but not against its target, it works against the Sea Smurfs. Sully Smurf could have abandoned them, could have been cast out for his caution, could have ended up in any number of other places. And indeed, since he left his own people to come here because Chip Hazard got too close, because he thought that leaving his people would help to protect them, why wouldn't you assume that he would leave the Sea Smurfs now in order to protect them? If any of this had happened, all Chip Hazard would be left with is a pointless war with the Sea Smurfs who weren't previously a threat to his evil colonizer gang. It's lucky that this is not what ends up happening. And ideally, you do not pivot your plot on luck if you can possibly avoid it. Here, though, the film has actually chosen to pivot its plot on luck. Sully Smurf explains that if the whales get hit with tracking beacons, they are marked for death, which you'd think hyper-intelligent whales who've been hunted for years might have been able to figure out for themselves, but no. So if they are hit by them, they have to call for Sully Smurf, and he will go out to silence the beacons, he says. And because it's been a few minutes, he reminds us that saving their lives is all that matters because
what's real is family.
This is enough to persuade the temporarily war-hungry Sea Smurfs that war isn't the answer, so they all agreed to tell the whales to leave, which doesn't so much jar with the vociferous objections to this plan that they raised but a few minutes ago, as much as it overrides them. So they just kind of forget that telling the whales to leave goes against everything they know and believe, and they agree to it after all. But then, Smurfette becomes war-hungry, and she tells Sully that they have to fight back. He says, correctly, that it's all a trap. The Smurf Marines aren't hunting the whales, they're hunting them. Which you might remember but would be forgiven for having forgotten, because several years have passed since the beginning of this film, was the reason they left the Jungle Smurfs to begin with. Following Sully Smurf's logic, they have no choice but to run away again now. It's the right thing to do, as established by Sully Smurf's own argument and actions earlier in the film. It's the reason they are here to begin with. Will this be their resolve a second time? Well, we don't know yet, because we have to go do more of the teen drama stuff that I'm sure everyone has been longing to see more of. Smurf Boy wants to go and warn Outcast Whale that he needs to leave too, but his older brother, who has been so much of a non-entity that I don't even have a name for him yet, tells him to stop making things difficult, which launches Smurf Boy into a passionate speech about his own imperfections. Everybody wants him to be the perfect little soldier, you see? Everyone wants him to be just like his big brother, but he's not. Gosh darn it, he's not. I don't care. But okay then. To use the language this film has deployed several times, and always to my regret, you do you, bro. And because this entire subplot is the definition of what we might euphemistically call unwise, the argument concludes with Smurf Boy telling his brother that he isn't his brother, the whale is his brother. The fucking whale is his brother. Oh my goodness, my pubic hair is cringing. Smurf Boy goes off to find Outcast Whale, and all the other Smurf kids go after him. Inconveniently, in the whole wide ocean, the Smurf Marines on their whaling ship just happen to have arrived in this exact spot at this exact time. So we have a race against time, as they try to get the tracking beacon off of the Outcast Whale before the evil colonizers arrive and kill them all. The Smurf kids only now think it might be worth telling Solly Smurf where they are and what's going on. That really hard hammering noise you hear in the background is James Cameron frantically trying to manufacture a fight sequence here, but he's forgotten all of his tools, so he's trying to bang the pieces together with his shoe. The Smurfs tool up and head on out to rescue the Smurf kids. Again, it looks very pretty. The visuals are great. Well done, film. Just so we're clear though, Outcast Whale is outcast because he went to fight in self-defense and got people killed. That's what the whales believe, and that's what the Sea Smurfs believe. Now, though, the Sea Smurfs are going out to fight to rescue their kids who are trying to rescue Outcast Whale. By the warped morality of this film, does this mean that Outcast Whale is going to be blamed for all the resulting deaths here as well? Or are we just going to forget about it because, like everything else in the film, the morality only runs surface deep? The colonizers arrive, and we begin a repeat of the whale hunt sequence, only for Chip Hazard to tell them not to use the depth charges. Instead, they send in the crab robots and the submarines to try and surround the Smurf kids. Conveniently, and like the film, the Smurf kids have forgotten that you have three-dimensional movement underwater, so rather than do the sensible thing and go above or below their pursuers, they spend most of their time in a flat plane pursuit. Eventually they all fall off their little Leopleurodons, and there's a chase/hunt sequence through some big reeds and underwater foliage. The crabs snare some of the Smurf kids in a net. They are picked up by some Smurf marine pterodactyls. Spider is watching all of this from aboard the ship, and he decides that he doesn't like what he's seeing, which for the first time occasions some faint hint of awareness on the part of the evil colonizers that you probably shouldn't be letting mostly naked boy prisoners just wander around unshackled and unguarded. Spider runs to try and help his friends, but he fails and they all get captured. Recall that this is Spider's foster family. Recall that he grew up with them. Recall that they then proceeded to not give a solitary shit about each other from the moment he was captured. Now, the first interaction between them as Spider is restrained and Smurf Boy is pinned down on the deck sees Spider say, and I quote directly,
"Bro, you okay?"
And Smurf Boy say,
"Never better." Yeah.
2 hours and 17 minutes into the film. No character writing to speak of. Chip Hazard cuffs Smurf Boy, Daughter Smurf, and Pretty Smurf to the rails of the ship, just in time for Solly Smurf and the Sea Smurfs to arrive. So we have a standoff. You will recall that Chip's sole motive in this story is to kill Solly Smurf. Well, during this standoff, Solly Smurf and the Sea Smurfs come to a full stop. They just sit there on the water, scouting the ship. On the ship, Chip Hazard and the Sea Smurfs stand there, scouting the Sea Smurfs. They have a direct line of sight. They have rifles with scopes. They are using the rifles with the scopes to look at Solly Smurf. All of the rifles are trained on him. So that's it. That's the end of the film. We can wrap up now. Pull the trigger, mission accomplished, Solly Smurf is dead. You can fight off the rest of the Sea Smurfs pretty easily. You have a tremendous advantage in firepower and in technology. Your mission's done. Well done, Chip. You win. You win. Except no, it's not the end of the film. Because rather than doing the thing he is here to do and just shoot Solly Smurf, Chip decides to radio him and tell him to stand down and come to the ship alone. Why? Why are you doing this thing, Chip? You've won. Pull the fucking trigger, Chip. That's why you're here, Chip. Why are you delaying, Chip? Why are you inviting Solly Smurf to the ship, Chip? This film's already too long, and you've now written it to such a way that the villain cannot lose, so that's it. Well done, you win. Just end the film now, Chip. Pull the damn trigger. Solly Smurf says, "Fine then," and off he goes. Incidentally, Big Chief Sea Smurf's crazy wife chooses this moment to say, "You brought this upon us, you." Which realization might have been impactful about half an hour ago, but is entirely meaningless in this scene. Solly Smurf has already decided that he's going. Her saying that, and him responding, "So that's why it has to be me," changes nothing about this scene. He was already going to the ship. He had already said he was going to the ship. If the film had any regard for character consistency, it might have used this to be much more interesting much earlier on. Big Chief Sea Smurf's crazy wife might have remembered that this had always been her deep-rooted objection to taking in Sully Smurf, and the Sea Smurfs might have exiled him and his family in a bid to stave off the war they were previously very intent on staving off. I'd go so far as to say that that was the most natural turn the story could have taken. It would have accorded with the entire ethos of the Sea Smurfs, paid off their at best hesitant relationship with Sully Smurf. Saving it until now, though, when it can't actually affect the story, is a waste of the previous setup that actually calls attention to the waste of the previous setup. It's as though little Jimmy Cameron got to this point and somebody reminded him what he'd written an hour ago, and then he said, shit, fuck, you're right. What's the quickest way we can get out of this hole we didn't know we'd been digging? Oh, I know. And so we get Big Chief Sea Smurf's crazy wife's line. Off goes Sully Smurf. Up in the sky, Smurfette is just flying around, apparently. I suppose she's waiting for her cue to enter the plot again. Beneath the surface, the evil colonizers have entirely forgotten that there is a whale floating around, and Outcast Whale has a frown, so we know shit's about to go down. Taken from above and below, one would assume. One of the Smurf Marines has Sully Smurf in his sights. He actually tells us it's an easy shot, but Chip Hazard stops him. He actually puts his hand on his gun and forces him to lower it, his justification being, if you take him now, they'll attack. Remember how earlier Sully Smurf and the Sea Smurfs had to avoid war because they'd be wiped out by the Sky People? Remember how Chip Hazard's small band of Smurf Marines has had no trouble subjugating entire villages of Sea Smurfs? Remember how Chip Hazard has always assumed his own technological and military superiority via the Smurfs, so has no inbuilt reason to fear that attack? Well, I'm glad you remember all of that, because the film doesn't. However, it takes Sully Smurf so long to reach the ship that Outcast Whale has time to work himself up into a rage and does what I can only describe as a half-free willy, leaping out of the water to crash down on the deck of the whaling ship, crushing a few mech suits in the process and generally causing havoc. The whaling ship captain, who for plot-convenient reasons is off on a speedboat at this particular time, reappears in shot and fires a harpoon at Outcast Whale, who headbutts it away, and then he hauls himself off the ship and back into the water. Whaling ship captain, who I should point out is Australian, says,
Bloody hell! I'm gonna jam my thumb in its butthole now! This should really piss it off!
I can't with the dialogue, man. Just no. And the Sea Smurf sees this opportunity to attack. For reasons best known to themselves, the speedboats from the whaling ship come equipped with Gatling guns, even though the previous scene with Outcast Whale on the deck of the ship clearly established that bullets can't penetrate their skin. But they open fire with the Gatling guns they have anyway. Conveniently, they miss every single one of the Sea Smurfs long enough for them to dive under the water. You might recall, the boats have depth charges, and that these have been shown to be super effective against their underwater targets, but for plot-convenient reasons, they just kind of forget about those for a bit. Instead, some helicopters that the script forgot they'd brought with them, and that weren't in any of the previous scenes, now come back into the scene, and they shoot at the underwater Smurfs, which needless to say is not very effective. Hey, remember how just a couple of minutes ago you had all the Sea Smurfs lined up like ducks in a shooting gallery, and Sully Smurf in a clear line of your snipers, and you could have just taken them out, completing your mission, while using your helicopters maybe to attack the Sea Smurfs from above and behind, thereby wiping them out quickly and easily? No, I guess we shouldn't expect highly trained Smurf Marines who've lived 2 lifetimes by this point to have a basic grasp of military tactics. Just as nobody paid any attention to Outcast Whale swimming angrily around beneath the ship, so nobody on either the ship or the speedboats or in the helicopters notices Smurfette flying aimlessly around in the sky. So as the helicopters move into attack, she dive bombs them. And the helicopters are just as staggeringly useless as they were at the beginning of the film. You might have thought that any even semi-competent army would have learned from their past mistakes, and given their helicopters such mind-bogglingly advanced technology as glass that can resist a bow and arrow. But that would be asking far too much of this hyper-advanced futuristic human race we've been repeatedly told poses an existential threat to the Smurfs, so Smurfette has no trouble shooting the pilots with her medieval-ass weaponry and destroying the helicopters. The Sea Smurfs have similarly little trouble dispatching the speedboats because the colonizers have still not remembered they have depth charges. Honestly, would it have been too much to ask for just a single line of dialogue explaining that they'd used them all up on the last whale hunt, or that there was a malfunction or something? That's really all it would have taken to address this problem. A complete rewrite would have been needed to solve the rest of the problems, but we could have at least solved one of them. Then, the whaling ship captain says, somebody shoot something, so they do decide to use their depth charges. against their now airborne opponents, the ones on the flying fish. Solly Smurf, though, takes them out with his rifle. Chip Hazard takes to the air and chases down Smurfette, but Solly Smurf comes up behind him and shoots at him, and then he runs out of ammo. Under the water, and you are just going to have to take my word for this because Daughter Smurf, who has dived off the whaling ship with the rest of the Smurf kids, plugs her USB hair cable into some sort of coral reef, and she directs it to grab hold of a submarine that's chasing them and to crush it. It's like a video game, you see, except that instead of turrets, it's coral reefs. And to add some dodgy morals to the dodgy mechanics, the defeated submariners desperately try and escape their destroyed craft and swim back to the surface, only for Smurf Daughter to direct the coral to grab and crush her defeated, defenseless, unarmed enemies. There is no Geneva Convention on Pandora, at least we've established that. Next on the list of things that did happen, Outcast Whale flips a speedboat onto the whaling ship, which lodges itself in one of the ship's engines. This cues Spider to decide to be a good guy again for the next few minutes. Even though he's previously tried to escape and help the Smurfs, he has still been allowed to walk around the bridge unrestrained and unguarded. So he grabs a fire extinguisher, he twats a pilot in the head, and turns the engines on. This causes a fire. Then he manages to smash more controls for a good little while before anybody thinks it might be worth trying to stop him. This sends the ship forward to crash into some rocks and to start sinking. Albeit Spider and some of the Smurf kids are still aboard and the latter are still chained to the railings, so it's not over yet. But it's worth remembering this. Spider has, in this action, just destroyed the entire mission. You might think there'll be some repercussions. You might think that. There won't be, but you might think it. Solly takes out Chip Hazard's pterodactyl, Outcast Whale battles whaling ship captain Speedboat, and takes it out in such a way as allows him to inflict maximum vengeful justice on the captain, while allowing the nice science guy to survive the encounter. Bet he's glad Outcast Whale doesn't know how much brain fluid he's been extracting from his brothers and sisters these last few years. Most of the Smurf kids have now escaped, but for plot convenient reasons, Smurf Daughter, specifically, gets picked up by a Smurf Marine on a pterodactyl and returned to the ship. Smurf Marine calls her Buttercup. She says, "I'm not your Buttercup, perv," adding yet another tally to the very long list I've got entitled Occasions When It Would Have Been Better If They Had Said Nothing. At some point during this horrid mess of a fight scene, I think there was a brief deliberation between the Smurf brothers as to whether they should bother trying to save Spider, the answer to which, of course, should be no, given the uniform lack of shits they gave about him until this precise moment. But Smurf Boy suggests they should probably try and save him anyway. I don't think I need to reiterate why this action is unsupported by the build-up, other than to say that it would have been nice if the Solly Smurf fam had mentioned Spider even once across the previous 2 hours, thereby making this act of self-sacrifice seem like it has, at least a little diegetic reason to be. Back aboard the whaling ship, Spider has suffered absolutely no repercussions for the act of sabotage that destroyed the entire ship. He is still walking around unguarded and unrestrained, but now he isn't fighting the people he was fighting in the last scene. They're all abandoning the ship, and he's abandoning it with them. One of the Marines tells him, "Check your mask, make sure it's on tight," to which his response is, "I'm good, dumbass." He just destroyed your ship. He just wrecked your mission. He just enabled all of this to happen by attacking you and aiding your enemy. He was fighting you in his last scene. I can't decide what's annoying me more, the fact he's forgotten he was fighting them, or the fact they've forgotten he was fighting them. It's honestly as if that entire very important scene, functionally important, as in it enabled the middle act of the battle, and is the reason they are now all abandoning the ship, well, it's as if none of that happened to the characters involved in it. It's really quite astonishing. He really should be dead. At the very least, he should be cuffed and frog-marched out, assuming they still see him as some sort of asset, but no, we've just reverted to the pre-sabotage status quo. I'm very annoyed that the film isn't legally downloadable yet, because I really think it's one of those occasions where a side-by-side comparison would have really aided the review, but I'm just going to have to hope my description engenders in you, darling, the same shock and disbelief as it's instilled in me. To call this amateur writing would be an insult to amateurs. Actions must have consequences, you hacks. There are occasions when it's useful to do little sidebars in these reviews, tips for writers covering general rules, things to look out for and avoid. This is not one such occasion. This is such an obvious oversight that nobody over the age of 7 is at risk of committing it, unless they are employed apparently on lucrative contracts by large movie studios, in which case they have no talent whatsoever. Speaking though of entirely unjustifiable resets, much of what's just happened was done to move certain characters from place to place. The Smurf kids were captured aboard the whaling ship. The battle happened so they could escape. Chip Hazard was aboard the ship. The battle happened so he had to leave the ship to fight Sully Smurf, etc. Ideally, for your action sequences to be justified, they have to achieve some material change in universe. If, for example, you have a rescue scene that devolves into a battle, the culmination of that scene should build on both the rescue and the battle. If you ever find yourself writing 20 or 30 minute sequences and ending them back where you began with all the most important dynamics not only unresolved but reset, you've probably, not always, but probably done something wrong in your writing. So if I were to tell you that the rescue mission led to a battle that saw all of the Smurf kids and Chip Hazard and Spider leave the ship they were on when the sequence began, you would expect that whatever the outcome, you would not end up with the Smurf kids and Chip Hazard and Spider back aboard that ship. If the rescue sequence saw the Smurf kids escape Chip Hazard's clutches and escape the ship, you would not expect to end up with the Smurf kids in Chip Hazard's clutches on the ship. Because if you do end up in that position, your audience would be forgiven for thinking, well, just what the quivering fuck was the point of the last 20 minutes of the film that we just sat through? Meaning I must now ask, just what the quivering fuck was the point of the last 20 minutes of the film we just sat through? Because we have somehow, despite all I've just described, despite the rescue mission, the protracted and borderline nonsensical battle, despite the escape, we have somehow ended up back on the ship with the Smurf kids in the clutches of Chip Hazard. One of the kids actually speaks the line, "I can't believe I'm tied up again." No, James, no. Nor can I. Maybe you should have fixed this when you were writing the damned script, James. This is the She-Hulk, it's fine because we're aware it's shit defense. And it's not on, James. It really isn't. Why have you written it this way? Why do you take so much time? And why do you achieve so little? Why is it left to random little YouTubers like me to ask these most fundamental questions? Why didn't the studio ask the same question years ago? The Smurf brothers rescue Spider from the Marines. As if to emphasize how deep his character is and how beautiful is his familial relationship with the Smurf brothers, he says, "Thanks, guys." And that's it. I mean, you could have just not. You had to film that. You had to do several takes. You had to film the mocap and the live action separately. That probably cost a few $100,000, all for him to say, "Thanks, guys." Cameron is so lucky he was able to make this film during the silly money decade. Anyway, they hotkey plot armor and they escape, but the buff didn't apply quickly enough to the older brother with less personality than the younger brother who has very little personality anyway, so older brother is injured and they have to get him back to safety. They meet up with Sully Smurf on a random ocean rock. The sun is setting. Smurf Ed arrives. Smurf Boy says, "It's okay, bro, we got you." But no, bro, they don't got you. And he dies. That's right, the brother the film has spent no time on. The brother on whom no character work has been done, the brother who's only been in a couple of scenes, he's the one who dies. And in response, Smurfette goes all soy jack. We are meant to feel sad about this. Look, isn't it poetic how the sun sets just in time for a character death? Can't you appreciate the tragedy of it? The whole universe feels it. You can tell because the sun is setting. No, I'm sorry, film, but you can fuck right off. You don't get to assume we care about this. If you want a meaningful death, you have to kill a meaningful character. Nobody gives a damn when an NPC dies. That's why hordes of bored gamers massacre entire towns in Skyrim for a laugh. If you wanted to kill anyone in this moment, you should have made it the younger brother, Smurf Boy. Kill Outcast Whale too for poetic symmetry if you want to. You'd have had to do something else to excuse the non-payoff from that risible arc. Have this kid, who believes he's all alone in the world, die. Have him, though, die in the arms of his family, as proof that he was wrong. Have his last realization be that he is loved, he has a family. For tragic contrast, you could have Outcast Whale die alone, beneath the sea, unredeemed. It's a corrupted parallel, someone outcast because his family died, someone who dies in the arms of the family he believes cast him out. And hell, that might not even be that good, it just popped into my head. And I've been on the whiskey for a few hours at this point, but I'd have felt something if I'd seen that. A kind of compound bitterness, a multiplied tragedy, emphasizing the isolation of the one by redressing the isolation of the other. A double payoff, if you will, that would ensure we don't end up feeling that this end was twee and kitsch and overly romantic and fundamentally pointless. If you, as a writer, are really invested in this scene, You cannot take the cop-out approach and off somebody who is irrelevant. The qualifier is that this character is supposed to be highly relevant to our other main characters. He is, after all, the eldest brother, a son, a mentor, an idol to be loved and to be jealous of. Hark back to the random and perfunctory exchange between the two Smurf brothers a little while ago when Smurf Boy tells older brother, "I'm not you." We know what the film is trying to do. The film is trying to stress that he feels the weight of expectation, his brother is perfect, he feels imperfect. As a result of this, he feels outcast. There is a huge gap between the last two sentences there, but who cares? But yeah, so as I say, I know what the film is going for. But as perfunctory and unnecessary as Smurf Boy's character has been throughout the film, older Smurf brother doesn't even have as much as that. He is a non-entity. He's like the character you come up with in a first draft of a script, one with the base elements of a personality, maybe a couple of notes attached to his profile, who you end up dropping because he's just not necessary for the plot. He's doomed to exist in that netherworld of almost people that all writers create. Except that in this film, he's been plucked from that netherworld and here, now, thrust to the fore. He is the linchpin in a moment, in a sacrifice, the thing on which all motives are pinned and all emotions are hinged. If you're going to do this now, you need to have put in the work beforehand. And this film didn't. It fits a long-established pattern. I said way back at the top that we're a society uncomfortable with genuine emotion, and the Feelies are not designed to evoke genuine emotion. What they give us is play acting. We watch these events unfold on the screen and we are supposed to understand, without feeling, what their import is. We may say, well, I understand what role this character plays, and so logically, I can infer what other people on screen feel about his demise. What we don't say is, oh my goodness, I myself feel what these characters feel. Like sex in Brave New World, emotion in this film is a mechanical artifice. It's pneumatic and unfeeling. It has narrative entailments, but it means nothing. I feel substantially less sad about his death than I did about the whale hunt earlier in the film, and that's not because I prefer whales to people. Or rather, it's not just because I prefer whales to people. The most tragic aspect of this scene is Spider being present and trying to emote, because that's another of those entirely unearned things that just happens because the script has nothing else to do with him. Of course, what the film should do at this point is use his death as inspiration for Smurf Boy. He now has to go from "I'm not you" to "I will take up your mantle." This should be his moment of moral awakening, his discovery of tragic purpose, but we don't get that yet, because Chip Hazard radios Sully Smurf to bait him with the news that he has his daughter's prisoner. And as if it wasn't already irritating enough that the preceding battle's resetting of the pieces made it all sound and fury signifying nothing, we get another "I can't believe they locked me up again" moment as Chip says, "Same deal as before, you for them." Gee, just like the last time. Because it's apparently a contractual obligation that Spider be a third wheel in every single scene in this act, the film decides that Sully Smurf can't understand the plain meaning of words like "they're inside, by the moon pool, amidships," so Spider has to guide him there. You will recall, I'm sure, that Sully Smurf spent all but the last few years of his life as a human speaking English. Recall how, at the beginning of the film, he detailed how it took him a few years of listening to Smurf tongue before it became as familiar to him as English. These words should not have been lost in translation. It is not an especially big ship. This exchange has only occurred because the film wants Spider to be aboard for the final encounter, and it couldn't think of another excuse to get him back there. It could have left him there, for God's sake. Nothing was actually achieved by rescuing him, save the death of a non-entity character that could have been manufactured in a dozen different ways that wouldn't then require a fourth resetting of one particular piece on the board. Spider has now been leaving the ship, gone back to the ship, has left the ship, and is now going back to the ship again, even though he has no reason to, because Sully Smurf shouldn't need the guidance he's offering. So, why is he doing this? Well, yeah, because as you may or may not recall, the film has on occasion intimated that it wants a father-son dynamic in play between Spider and Chip Hazard, who, as I've said before but have to repeat, isn't the father he never knew but hated the memory of, right up until their first fucking meeting, but the Smurf clone of that man. In another of those writer's sidebars that you absolutely don't need because no sensible person would ever make this mistake, if you ever find yourself with a character whose sole attachment to another character is because that character is the Smurf clone of a bad father they never knew and hated the memory of, but decided they liked so much that they'd abandon their actual family because they met him once, you have made a profound mistake. You should probably burn your script and resolve never to write another one for the good of humanity. Everyone has a book in them, as Christopher Hitchens said, and in most cases that is exactly where it should remain. Spider says some version of, "I'll show you, come on," 4 or 5 times, like Navi in Ocarina of Time, only slightly more annoying.
Come on, I'll show you. Come on, I'll show you. Come on.
Sully Smurf tells Smurfette to be strong.
You don't turn your back on family.
And he goes to meet with Chip. Smurf Boy says, "Dad, I want to go with you," and Sully Smurf says bitterly, "You've done enough," thus finally giving Smurf Boy the abandonment motive his whole character has rested on for the last 2 hours. At least this bit almost works in that he's the reason they were out here to begin with, so he's the reason all of this happened, so he's the reason his brother is dead. That's all fine, I guess. Accepting that Sully Smurf's whole reason for being in this film is family, and Smurf Boy is his only surviving son, and his sole reason for telling Smurf Boy to remain behind is stay with your brother, and he's talking about the dead brother, making for a degree of character confusion here, since his line is delivered with the finality of, "I hate you," yet driven by, "because I don't want you in harm's way." Character confusion, though, and unlike confused characterization, which has been the film's bedevilment hitherto, is at least explicable in universe, so we can forgive and even understand Sully Smurf's apparent contradiction here, because his head's gonna be in several places at once. That is categorically different from the writer's head being in several different places as they write their characters, which is the reason for, among other things, Smurf Boy being given a motivation for his actions after his actions have occurred. He has now got the abandonment motive, but he needed the abandonment motive beforehand in order to get to the position which earned him that motive. That's confused characterization, which is something very different. Sully Smurf and Spider arrive on the ship. Smurf Boy, back on the rock, decides to follow them. Chip Hazard continues to bait Sully Smurf, saying, "Your boy didn't have to die, you brought that on yourself." Even though, at least as far as I was able to detect, Chip had absolutely no knowledge of what occurred, and no way of knowing that Big Brother Smurf was dead. Sully Smurf takes out a good chunk of the surprisingly large number of surviving Marines by lobbing a grenade at a helicopter that inexplicably wasn't launched during the all-out war segment earlier. Smurfette also arrives and takes out a few more. Smurfette has the plot armor buff activated, so she manages to avoid about 3,000 rounds fired at her in the space of 30 seconds by highly trained Marines. Chip Hazard then runs out of ammo, so he draws his knife. Smurfette has a clear shot at another Smurf Marine with her bow, but Sully Smurf then appears, and they get into a fistfight. Sully Smurf throws him into the sea. Then Smurfette goes a little bit mad, which we know because she screams a lot and her eyes are maniacally wide, and she takes out pretty well every human left aboard, which frightens Spider, who is watching from behind a beam. They are very much on top until Chip Hazard emerges from around a corner with Daughter Smurf in his clutches and a knife to her throat. Oh no! He forces Sully Smurf to put his weapons down, then, being a complete fucking Spider, who has been hiding and is behind Chip Hazard, and is on his actual family's side in this particular minute because he is. Spider, who we were shown right at the beginning of the film to be resourceful and reasonably capable. Spider, who we were shown at the beginning of the film not to be a complete irredeemable tool. Spider, who we've seen to be able and willing to fight when the script lets him. Spider, who has all these skills in the best possible strategic position, who would have been able to sneak up on Chip Hazard from behind and twat him in the head, just waddles out from cover and politely asks Chip to stop being evil. I'm very tired. I'm tired of this. It's taken me 3 days to get to this point of the film. Yes, I genuinely have spent 3 days in an Indian cinema, just trust me on that one. This script is now dangerously close to 30,000 words long. There's still around half an hour left of the film. I've gone into Spider's faults at some considerable length, and the problems with this wacko relationship, and I've detailed so many ways in which this film treats common sense as impossibly rare knowledge. I hope anyway, that I can rely on you guys to fill in for me why this is probably the worst possible decision his character could have made given his starting position, abilities, motive, goal, and whole list of potential actions. I'm pretty sure I can rely on you to know why that's dumb. And anyway, there's a metric fuckton of nonsense I have to cover, like, for example, Smurfette. Seeing that Chip Hazard has Daughter Smurf, who means a lot to her, Smurfette appears from behind Spider, who appeared from behind Chip, but unlike Spider, she did something that might superficially be deemed sensible in taking Spider hostage, meaning the standoff is now balanced. Chip has Daughter Smurf, Smurfette has Spider. There's a knife to the throat of each of the children. Except Why should Smurfette have assumed Spider meant anything to Chip? I'll admit, there is a chance I missed this scene because we're nearly 3 hours in and there's been so much nonsense to cover, but at what point did Smurfette realize that Spider was in any way important to Chip? I genuinely don't see it. I assume she knows he's Chip's son. Spider knows he's Chip's son, so it must have been fairly common knowledge, though he was the only one who made anything of it earlier in the film. Nobody else thought it worth remarking upon. It was never a reason given by any other character for him being kept at arm's length, at least as best I can recall. He's still alive, I guess, so is that a reason for her to make this assumption? No, I don't think it is. What she knows of Chip comes from his past life, you know, the one where he never so much as mentioned having a son because the writers hadn't thought of it then. She knows him as a brutal, cold, clinical, effective killer, someone who acts without remorse. The logical assumption to make from her perspective was that he kept Spider alive because he believed Spider mattered to the Smurfs. That's it. Because absolutely nothing has been done with Spider's character, it is a little bit unclear. The Smurfs didn't give a shit that he was kidnapped, hence not mentioning him once after they left for the islands. Yet before that, they were shown to be reasonably close with him, to treat him as family. The kids referred to him as cousin. That is the probable motive behind his continued existence. I can't think of a single piece of evidence that Smurfette has to believe Chip Hazard values Spider for his own sake. There isn't any. I just don't get it. Maybe I have missed something, but I really don't think I have. I think this is just another of those instances where something is so clear in the writer's head that they assume it must be clear to the audience, and it isn't because the work has not been done. Which is perhaps a more useful sidebar. You might have, as a writer, a really powerful sense of character, place, belonging, relationship. That is your preconception. And preconceptions are pretty dangerous because you, as a writer, might have a really firm idea about where your story is going, a really strong sense about what has to happen in the second or third act, but because you have so strong a sense, you run the very real risk of assuming that the way you get there is the right way, and the steps you've taken to fill in your initial leap of imagination have, in fact, filled the void. But character decisions that make sense with your foreknowledge do not necessarily make sense with the knowledge the audience has of those characters. They don't know them as well as you do. Very few writers are so procedural that they go from A to B to C to D all the way through incrementally and in order to Z. Most writers, in my experience, jump forward and then fill in gaps later on. In everything I've ever written, I've had the end in mind long before the beginning, and certain episodes of the second and third act in mind long before the intermediate episodes of the first and the second acts. It's perfectly natural to set a goal and to work your way toward it. It can be pleasurable even. You can surprise yourself with what you come up with in between. I wrote a globe-hopping adventure story and ended up in entire countries I never imagined I'd visit, even though I visited them in real life, in order to have the plot progression make sense. I made my fictional world around reality. But unless you're very aware of this process, or you have a team of writers to whom you can contract out that kind of awareness, which is more likely in an especially deep and expansive work, you will slip up. If there is no way to ensure that the reader, the user, the player understands it, then the idea must be ditched. No idea is so sacred that it exists irrespective of the audience's understanding of it. Whether you're writing a novel or making a film or a game, headcanon is no substitute for actual canon. Love for an idea does not make that idea good. The key is in the delivery. Character actions must be explicable by what you have established in universe, not by what the audience would know if the audience were inside your head. This is the opposite of the approach taken in Avatar: The Way of Water, as evidenced by this exact scene, the knife at the neck of Daughter Smurf, the knife at the throat of Spider. You know James Cameron had this scene in mind early on. He wanted this scene to happen. He wanted it long before he got to it. But either he was writing it alone, or he was writing it with a team of sycophants who all thought, well shit, it's James Cameron. James Cameron did Terminator 2 and Aliens and Titanic. Anything he says must be right. So nobody ever looked at this script and asked, wait, but why? How does this make sense given the character development we've included, given the plot we've written, given these past interactions? Cameron wanted to reach this point, he wanted it a lot, so how the point is reached just doesn't matter that much. He said it, so it's right. Nobody thought to tell him he'd cocked up. This is no way to write a screenplay. You might point to the eternal recurrence of Marvel films and say, well, it happens all the time. But you can at least understand the mechanics at play with the MCU. Marvel has had to churn out product after product after product. It hasn't allowed time for proper scrutiny in its writers' rooms. Its VFX teams are famously working till their fingers bleed. But with Avatar, 13 years have elapsed between the first film and this one. There is no such excuse. Entire films worth of ideas would have been created and discarded in that time. They had the time to make the fundamentals of their script make sense, yet somehow the finished product is one that suggests less time was taken on the writing than on any given MCU Phase 4 product, and there is no excuse for that. You were supposed to raise the bar, James, not leave it in darkness. Oh dear. Oh dear. But we move on. We're nearly there. Smurfette demands Chip release Daughter Smurf or she'll cut Spider. Chip tells her he doesn't care about Spider, which should be true, but isn't, because James Cameron said so. Spider continues to struggle with the dialogue. For some reason, he's coded to repeat every single one of his lines. We had, "I'll show you, come with me. I'll show you, come on, come with me. I'll show you," earlier. In this scene, it's,
Please don't hurt her. Just please let her go. Please.
Don't kill her.
Listen to me. Let her go. Don't hurt her. Please, don't hurt her. Ah! Please, just let her go, okay? Just let her go.
It's NPC level dialogue, and not a modern NPC either. We're talking like the days of Morrowind, that level of dialogue. "Son for a son," Smurfette says, then she scratches Spider along the chest with her knife. She goes to stab him properly, and that causes Chip Hazard to crack for no established reason whatsoever, and he lets Daughter Smurf go. Smurfette releases Spider, and now the whole family remember they like and care about him, and getting him off the ship safely is their priority. Chip Hazard, having just shown a vulnerability and a moral attachment, becomes evil again. As the Smurf fam back off into the water, he goads Sully Smurf again, telling him that he'll never stop coming, and when he finds them again, he'll kill his whole family. If the Smurf fam still retain the incredibly low level of shits they've given about Spider throughout this film, there would be an obvious rejoinder here. They know Chip cares about Spider now for some reason. They know that he'll give up pretty well any prize in order to keep Spider safe, in which case, the fact Spider is in their possession gives them considerable leverage. Unfortunately though, they can't really use him as such a bargaining chip if they care about him, and the film has lately remembered that they do, so perhaps that possibility would never have occurred to them. Not that it's especially relevant anyway, because this is an action film, and that means we are obliged to watch a protracted fistfight between a hero and a villain. It would be terrible if we accidentally did something not formulaic in an Avatar film. Inconveniently, no sooner does the fight start than the fuel from the whaling ship, which just so happens to have leaked in a perfect circle around said ship, ignites, and this stops the Smurf fam from leaving. They too will have to watch the fight, because even though we've seen that they are all incredible swimmers who can hold their breath underwater for an exceptionally long period of time, they have apparently decided they cannot swim underneath the fire. Brilliant. Quite why Smurfette isn't already involved in this fight, I'm not sure, since there was no reason for her to leave with the kids, and now, well, they've decided they can't leave. Now there's no reason for her not to rejoin the fight. It would be 2-on-1. She's been shown to be strong and capable, a good fighter. Between she and Sully Smurf, they could really make Chip's life difficult. The fam gets back aboard the ship, but then little Daughter Smurf gets sucked into a hole, and Smurfette dives in after her, leaving Spider and Daughter Smurf to continue running away from the fire, which is slowly encroaching. Spider's NPC lines in this scene are, come on, let's go, come on, let's go, come on. And it becomes quite funny because the film cuts quickly between the fight scene, between Smurfette and Baby Smurf inside the ship, and to Spider and Daughter Smurf running away from the fire, and Spider, even when he's only on screen for 2 seconds, will without fail find the time to say something like, let's go, come on, every fucking time. The ship begins to tilt, and he becomes one of those hand-holding characters who spoil puzzles in God of War. They have to climb the ship, so he says, come on, keep climbing, and give me your hand, come on, etc. The ship starts to roll, so he says, we're rolling over, come on, go. The fire gets in their way, and they change direction, so he says, come on, this way, this way. The ship rolls over and it sinks, throwing everyone under the water. There are mechanical issues at play here that the film seems to have forgotten about. We, though, well, we remember because the film forced us to sit through an interminable sequence earlier where the Smurf fam were taught how to be Sea Smurfs, how to swim, and how to breathe, enabling them to spend a good long time underwater. Yet for the duration of this climactic scene, the film has proceeded as though none of this ever happened. Smurfette and Baby Smurf have been in a panicky rush to stay above the rising water. They seem to hate the idea of even touching it. Sully Smurf and Chip Hazard, meanwhile, have been in and out of the water, yet Sully Smurf has been on the breathing course. He is very comfortable underwater, while Chip Hazard hasn't been on the course and isn't as comfortable underwater. Don't you think this might have entered Sully's mind even once? He's shown to be very resourceful in this battle, yet this incredible strategic advantage he has doesn't occur to him. So he voluntarily continues to engage Chip Hazard in his element, while being as reluctant as everyone else is to get wet. Only once the ship overturns do they end up fighting underwater at all, but then it's Chip Hazard who gains the advantage, which you would think is precisely the wrong way around. It's only temporary though, because more convenient ship crashing happens, and their positions reverse, and Sully Smurf chokes him out, leaving him floating down in the depths. So you might be thinking, well, he's dead. At present though, only Spider and Daughter Smurf are above the water. That's until Smurf Boy shows up from somewhere. I guess the fire burned out in one very specific section, or else he was the only one clever enough to swim underneath it. Anyway, we know he's arrived because he shouts, "Bro! Bro!" Fucking bro. I detest the way the Smurf kids have been turned into fucking surfers. My god. He has a Leopleurodon with him, and he takes Spider and Daughter Smurf underwater to rescue the rest of the fam. And during their descent, we see very clearly that they absolutely could have swum under the fire earlier, and only didn't because the film then wouldn't have been able to throw all of this peril at us. Sully Smurf runs out of air and starts to sink. Smurf Boy and Spider break up to go hunting for the fam. Daughter Smurf, meanwhile, plugs herself into a jellyfish, which she wears as a pretty cape, and she uses it to commune with some sparkling shrimp. No, I am not making this up. The reason is not yet apparent. Spider runs into a drowning Chip Hazard while Smurf Boy finds Sully. Both of these two have been unconscious for some considerable time owing to lack of air, which I think is one step short of the technical definition of drowning. But given there are a few films left to go in this zombie franchise, I think we can be quite sure that they will both survive. Sully Smurf does indeed wake up once he's brought into an air pocket. He tells Smurf Boy to go and save himself, but Smurf Boy declines, and instead repeats Sea Smurf mantra about the way of water having no beginning and no end, water connecting all things, life to death, darkness to light, the sea is always right, etc. Nobody has found Smurfette and Baby Smurf yet, but then Daughter Smurf sends out tendrils of magic shrimp which locate the missing parts of the fam and lead her to them. She hands over her jellyfish cloak for reasons, I guess. She says it'll help, it's not clear how or why. They follow the magic shrimp trail out of the ship. Sully Smurf and Smurf Boy do the same. It looks magical. The soundtrack wants us to wonder at the beauty of everything again. The fucking outcast whale who's been out of the script for God knows how long and who did nothing to assist them while the ship was sinking, then reappears in shot and helps Smurf Boy and Sully Smurf to reach the surface. Sully Smurf and Smurf Boy have a moment. Sully Smurf says, "I see you." And this is called a payoff. I'm not really sure to what, because there wasn't much setup besides him being a watery emo, but sod it. Payoffs are good. Sully Smurf narrates for us that the Sully Smurf fam sticks together, and this is their greatest weakness and also their greatest strength. They all have a hug. And then, because we're now out of danger and hope and love have triumphed, and the film is very keen that we understand this, the sun rises again. Spider hauls Chip Hazard out of the water and onto a rock. You might remember that Sully Smurf, who has been trained to swim, ran out of air and almost drowned a fair few times in the past few minutes, while Chip Hazard, who has received no such training and was never revived in an air pocket and has been unconscious for far longer, apparently just went into a holding pattern for that whole minutes-long sequence. Now he's out of the water, having not been breathing for several minutes. He's fine. His pterodactyl arrives. He asks Spider to go with him, and Spider, who has just saved his life because he secretly loves him, now hates him again. He hisses at him and he leaves. Chip flies off to regather his strength for the sequel. Meaning, by the way, that any death caused by Chip in the next film is at least partly on Spider. If he hated him, why did he save him? What even is their relationship at this point? I don't know. The film doesn't know. The only rule governing it seems to be convenience. Spider rejoins the Sully Smurf fam. Sully Smurf gives him a hug. He brings Smurf Boy into the hug and says, "A son for a son." Yay, they've both found their belonging. Isn't it lovely? Even though they already had it and only forgot about it because the plot demanded it be so. And we are still not fucking done. Smurfette is singing again. Sully Smurf is narrating again. He says a father protects. That's what gives him meaning. Lovely, good sentiment. It's still a shit film. They do a religious ritual at the underwater spirit tree to say goodbye to other Smurf son who died, the one whose only character trait is that he died. They swim him down to the tree which absorbs him. The message is beginnings and ends. You know this because the scene is intercut with the scene from the beginning of the film where they hold a baby aloft like Simba. Sully Smurf tells Big Chief Sea Smurf that they have to leave again to keep his family and the Sea Smurfs safe. Big Chief Sea Smurf tells him he's one of the tribe now. But because he used the actual name of the tribe, and the film apparently thinks we're all complete he has to make sure we know what's just transpired. We can't be expected to relate nouns to concepts, that's some big brain stuff. So Sully says, and I quote, "So there I was. We are the sea people now. This is our home." So in what I'm assuming is going to be pretty much its final scene or its penultimate scene, the film has quite successfully managed to undercut the entire premise of the film. He left his original people because he felt that getting away from them would help protect them and his family. He could have chosen to stay and fight, but that would have put everyone in danger. Now, though, he's been accepted by a different tribe of Smurfs, and he said, "I need to leave to keep you and my family safe." And he's been told, "No, you're one of us," and he says, "Fine, we'll stay and fight." Why didn't you do that at the beginning of the film? Sully Smurf and Smurfette connect their USBs to some sea flowers, which gives us a flashback to the archery scene from the beginning of the film, so they get to see dead Smurf Boy one last time. They smile. The music is triumphant. Sully tells us that this is their home now, it's their fortress, it's where they make their stand. Which is a shame, because quite apart from it destroying the premise of the entire film, I was very much hoping that Avatar 3 would go to another different biome. We've done the jungle, we've done the sea. We might have been able to do the Arctic next, or the fire biome. If you mine deep enough, do you find a portal into hell? Sully Smurf's eyes open defiantly, and that, at long last, is the end of the film. My God, we did it. We survived! It's taken me 4 days to get to the end of this film. 4 days and at present course, near enough 32,000 words. I still don't think I've touched more than half the problems with this film, but, well, I'm not taking up any more of your time or my own. I think, though, or at any rate I hope, that I've related enough of the sheer dumbfounding bullshit that is this plot and this writing to leave you with very little doubt as to the movie's qualities, or rather its lack thereof. This video is long enough without a lengthy summation to close it, but perhaps a quick few words before I leave you. Cinema, at its best, is an art form. It's visual storytelling. The medium has its limitations, as all mediums do, but a good film can be just as fulfilling, meaningful, evocative, deep, profound, and valuable as a good book. They are different ways of achieving the same end, enriching our minds and our culture by providing a story, a value set, a moral we can all share in. They give us our heroes and our villains. They teach us not who to look up to, but the kind of people to look up to, and those we should despise. They teach us things about ourselves, and they teach us things about our function. They teach us how to combine the two. They provide us with grand conflicts of visions and ideals, expressions of our timeless human tropes. We, though, are unfortunate enough to be living through an exceptionally shit age for film and cinema and storytelling generally. We live in an age that obsesses about my truth and my story, yet has absolutely no regard for truth in general or for story as an art form. We live in a navel-gazing society that's far more interested in destroying than it is in creating. And because we have very little interest in creating, we demand little of our creators, and so the culture produces nothing. This is an age in which the cinema can morph into the Feelies from Brave New World, because while stories are supposed to challenge us, to teach us, to ask questions of us as well as to answer the questions that we ask, so much of modern society isn't interested in any of these things. This is in part responsible for the decline of true cinematic heroes, the type that the MCU could invoke in its earlier phases and the type that it cannot summon into existence now. But it's also, just as importantly, responsible for the decline of cinematic villains. Indeed, the two go together, and they say something about us. It is very difficult, after all, to have one without the other. There are many ways to taxonomize evil. The broadest categories I can use while sustaining this point are, is your conception of evil preternatural or is it ideological? That is to say, in any given work of fiction, is evil a force unto itself, something both natural and supernatural, or is it the product of mind and reason, something created by our own intentions? Examples of the former are sometimes obvious and sometimes less so. Naturalistic evil is to be found in, for example, Jaws and Jurassic Park, where the villains, so to speak, have no intent. because they are embodiments of a cold and heartless nature. They are predators. The villain, for want of a better word, is nature itself. It's whatever exists that's above the heroes in the food chain. To bring this closer to the topic of this video, James Cameron inherited and did a good job with naturalistic evil when he took on Aliens. The xenomorphs have no genius, they have no will, they are malevolent expressions of a terrifying reality. Cameron has also done serviceable work with evil of the other sort, the human sort, which is harder to get right because there's more to work with and it demands more subtlety. Key to making believable villains of this sort is the understanding that few people are villains in their own stories. Most people have good intentions, and ill effects result either directly from those good intentions, paving the road to hell as the saying goes, or because circumstance trumps intentions. Cameron has given us examples of each. In Terminator 2, Miles Dyson is the unwitting progenitor of the film's preternatural evil, Skynet. His work is done with the best intentions. He can't fathom the hell to which he's paving the road. Once he's shown it and convinced of it, his fundamental qualities as a good and decent man transform him from the unwitting servant of evil to willing soldier in the battle to defeat it. He's the John Hammond of Spielberg's imagining, the hopeless optimist, injected though with a shot of self-awareness. In Aliens, the human villain is a career-minded opportunist, a corporate stooge, serving the preternatural evils of greed in the film's lampooning of corporatist capitalism and brutality in the xenomorphs he wishes to preserve. He does not conceive of himself as a villain. He's trying to better his own life and position, and he's been corrupted into evil deeds by his greed and his ambition. Carter Burke doesn't do what he does because he hates the colonists, because he hates the Marines, or because he hates Ellen Ripley. He subliminally detects that what he's doing might be wrong, but that isn't his motive for doing it. His motive is simply self-betterment and the advancement of company interests. Finally, in The Abyss, we have Lieutenant Coffee. Coffee is a Marine. He's a soldier, he's good at his job, he follows orders, he stays on mission, he takes the initiative. He's resourceful and he's effective, and there is nothing evil in any of that. He doesn't bring evil with him, he simply brings the capacity for evil deeds, which is what he's forced to commit by circumstances beyond his control. Once in the underwater rig, he begins suffering high-pressure nervous syndrome, and that produces acute paranoia and erratic and often violent behavior. He did not intend to do harm for harm's sake in his bid to nuke the aliens. He believes, because of his paranoia, he's doing the right thing. There are other examples in Cameron's filmography, but these three cover the most important types. Some of them are better than others. I think Cameron has always been more comfortable with naturalistic or preternaturalistic evil than with human evil. His excellent character work is an exception more than it is a rule. But he is, or he was, capable of both. In none of these films was the human villain evil because the human villain was evil. There were always reasons for it. They were never the villains in their own tales. In more intelligent works, of course, you have the license to do complex villainy on a much broader scale. Brave New World, 1984, and Arthur Koestler's Darkness at Noon spring most readily to mind as stories where the villain of the piece is afforded the chance to show their workings and explain their reasons. Mustafa Mond in Brave New World, O'Brien in 1984, and Ivanov and Gletkin in Darkness at Noon each make their case for the world they've built. Mustafa Mond is the most compelling because the world he's built so evidently functions and functions harmoniously. He achieves what he wants without much brutality and force, and other means the reader simply cannot sympathize with. But in each of the three cases, the villain of the piece is allowed to argue for themselves. The reader is presented with a conflict of visions. When this is done well, the reader might, and probably will, continue to disagree with the villain, but they should at least understand the villain, and they may even find some of the villain's arguments compelling. You have to agree with Mond that the price of emotion is instability, and the price of love is unhappiness. You can see why, logically, he decides to do what he's done in exiling art and therefore emotion from the Brave New World. And you can see that, in fact, it's dangerous because it works. Avatar is not that sort of film, but that's not necessarily a fault. Not every film should take this dialectic approach from the ground up. But well-realized characters and well-written stories can convey that this work has already been done. The villains have understandable motives. Hell, they have motives to begin with. You can see things from their point of view, and you can imagine how they might justify their actions to themselves. The first of these requires a fundamental questioning of the audience, and the second encourages questioning by the audience, but both approaches engage the audience in the question. Avatar, by contrast, does not. The first film's top-tier villain is just a replay of the greedy company from Aliens. Its proximate villain is Chip Hazard. And what is Chip Hazard? Why is Chip Hazard? Why does he do what he does? He is essentially Lieutenant Coffee from The Abyss, but without the cause that underpins Coffee's villainous turn. Coffee went mad with an inexplicable scientific reason from the tension and stress and pressure of his condition. Hazard is just a dick. He has no real character, he has no real motive, which is why The Way of Water thought it could get away with retconning one in the form of Spider, who didn't exist in the first film. But Spider doesn't explain the villainy. He almost explains a hesitance in that villainy, albeit one that doesn't actually impact proceedings in any way because the villainy simply re-emerges and reasserts itself. Yet Avatar does contain the potential to ask questions of its audience. It introduces two very significant causes in the film, stopping human aging and the death of the Earth. The first is pretty well redundant for reasons previously explained, which makes its inclusion contradictory and needlessly complicating, but the second should give us pause for thought. And if the film had a human villain as opposed to a derivative reworking of the aliens' preternatural greed, it could have lent much needed character to Chip Hazard and invited us to question his actions as against the actions of the Smurfs. In fact, somebody on 4chan did the work the film should have done in imagining a short soliloquy by Chip that ties his character to the world, gives him motive, and asks the audience a challenging question. It goes, and no, I'm not going to do the accent, "Spare us your pity, alien. You gush about your connection with nature, your primal wisdom, but what has it brought you? Where are your marvels of engineering, your voyages of discovery, your great insight into the nature of the universe? Even at our basest, when we dressed as you do, dwelt as you do, hunted as you do, lived as you do, we did more than merely survive. We built wonders, we made great journeys, we forged epics. You have not. You speak so proudly of the plugs dangling from your skulls, little realizing that they are but strings and you are puppets. What little you've accomplished you attribute to the wisdom of your goddess, who is nothing but the voices of your dead echoing for all eternity. She moors you to the past, serving as a leash that keeps you as little better than apes, and parodies of civilization that lack that special spark to become something more. We have come to your world in search of resources. Whether your actions drive us back or we take what we want and move on, the outcome is the same. We will depart from your wretched planet, leaving you behind, and in 1,000 years you will not have changed from this contact with another world. You will remain in your trees, hunting your prey, communing with your goddess, until your sun burns out and your world dies. And above your tomb, the stars will belong to us. Now, I'm not by any means advocating a word-for-word transplantation here. It isn't perfect by any means, it doesn't really fit Chip's character, but whoever made this put more thought into the story, the themes, the ideas, the philosophy, the quandary, and the conflict of visions than either of the Avatar films have. Avatar aspires to be an epic, but it runs away from anything approaching an epic theme or dilemma. True epics deal with epic themes. They ask the fundamental and profound questions, and often these are the simplest questions, questions of trade-offs. What have we lost by industrialization, but what would we never have gained had we not embarked upon industrialization? Cameron, though, instead chose the most superficial depiction of the noble savage motif and presented an entirely one-sided, basely Orientalist notion of the conflict, which isn't a conflict at all. It's simply an advertisement for a hollow intellectual fashion which treats all questions as settled. Jake Sully isn't a hero because Chip Hazard isn't a villain. They simply perform those roles. Nothing but disembodied entertainers gesticulating flatly on the screen and making gramophone-like noises as they do so. And because there are no heroes, and because there are no villains, we are not truly invested in the story they are a part of. Cameron was never brilliant at any of this, but he used to at least be good at it, which is why people, like me, will happily watch his old films while suffering through his new ones. Because his sense of purpose has shifted. He no longer cares about characters, stories, or indeed ideas. I criticize Avatar not because I hate everything James Cameron has ever done, far from it, but because Avatar falls so far beneath what was once his most mediocre offerings, and it cannot be measured on the same scale as his best works. The purpose of so much entertainment now is to distract us. It's prettified, it's gaudy, it's action-packed, it's designed to delight our senses and dull our minds. Films like Avatar are held up as the cinematic event, the thing we have to see to be current. We have to be up to date. The reason is never, this is a film with a brilliant and important story to tell. It's the equivalent rather of, look, Apple's released a new iPhone, look how shiny it is, go out and buy it, consume product. It's consumerism infused with a kind of pulp morality, artistic messages that don't challenge us and exist not to challenge us. They rather reaffirm our fashionable beliefs and opinions instead of making us question them. There is no virtue in being an environmentalist or an anti-capitalist, as these environmentally destructive and very capitalistic film studios present the concepts to us, because these are not really thoughts to begin with. There is only fashion, and fashion is the mentality of the herd. You see this, by the way, in the defense offered by fans of the film and its director who cross the political divide but are most curious when they come from people who fancy themselves anti-woke. These are the people who would ordinarily jump on anything they perceive to be vaguely left-wing, but who've demonstrated themselves so easy and so shallow with their principles that they will never actually interrogate them. So it is that because Avatar has nice things to say about family and fatherhood, its defenders turn around and say, well, at least it's not woke. Let's be clear about this. Avatar deploys all the enviro-leftist tropes. It preaches the innate superiority of native peoples over corrupt and decadent Western society. It lampoons capitalistic exploitation. It blames humanity for destroying the Earth. It presents as its alternative a kind of Gaia vision that wouldn't have been out of place at Woodstock in the 1960s. Its director says testosterone is a toxin that has to be sucked from the body in order that man be purified. He rails against fetishizing guns, apparently preferring to fetishize older, slower, and more brutal forms of warfare like tomahawks, bows, and spears. He claims the problem with Terminator Dark Fate is that it had Arnie in it and was your grandparents' Terminator, rather than the fact that he killed off John Connor in order to replace him with a young, diverse female savior of humanity. He has, in short, learnt none of his lessons, he's doubled down on them. He can, in short, deploy almost all the typical woke tropes and all the most important ones, the fundamental denunciation of Western and especially the American way of life, but that's all fine because the film doesn't portray all fathers as Is that really the message you want to send to these studios? You can attack the basis of our society and indeed of our civilization, but as long as you say one nice thing about it, we'll give you a pass. If that's your standard, my friends, you have no business complaining about politics in films. You are, if anything, less credible than the wokest of the woke and infinitely more credulous. At least they can create a belief system with something approaching a chain of logic with more than one sentence to it. You are just as in hoc to fashion as they are, you're just not as good at it or as thoughtful with it. And that's really saying something, because Avatar is one of the most thoughtless evocations of the so-called woke worldview that we've seen in recent years. Like the first film, The Way of Water is the example par excellence of all the above. It's the filmic equivalent of cannabis, or indeed soma. It's calming, comforting, relaxing, and it's stupefying. It's designed to reaffirm the base standards of a sleeping audience. It has no story to tell, it is a rehash. It has no message to convey, it is a repeat. It has no meaning to impart, it is fashion. It is current thing, emphasizing the trendy current thing, and that's all it is. I said on my other channel that Avatar The Way of Water deserved to flop. A whole flotilla of morons interpreted that as me saying that I thought that it would. I didn't. I am not that much of an optimist. Its success was preordained. It was preordained by the cabal of studios who willingly stood out of its way, leaving the audience with nothing else to watch. It was preordained by the money spent on its marketing and its unjustified reputation, and it was preordained by a movie-going audience too lazy to ask anything better of cinema than a pretty facade and base sensory pleasure. Oh, brave new world that has such people in it.